The autumn wind whispered through the sparse trees of the small hilltop cemetery, rustling the dried flowers Gabriel Thornton had just placed on the simple wooden cross. 5 years had passed, yet the weight of loss pressed down on him with the same crushing force as the day he'd buried his wife and unborn child. The late October sun cast long shadows across the graves, painting the weathered markers in amber and gold. Gabriel knelt, his calloused fingers brushing away dead leaves from Margaret's headstone. The engraving was simple. Margaret Ann Thornton, beloved wife, 1851-1874. Nothing about the child she'd been carrying, nothing about how they died, nothing about the man who had failed to protect them. "I'm still here, Maggie," he whispered, his breath visible in the cooling air. "Still trying." He bowed his head, the brim of his worn hat shielding his eyes from the setting sun. At 36, the former Union lieutenant looked older than his years. The war had left its mark in the slight limp when he walked, in the jagged scar that ran from his right temple to his jaw. But it was the invisible wounds that had never properly healed, the ones that woke him in the night, gasping for air, reaching for a wife who was no longer there. A distant crack pierced the silence, sharp and unmistakable. A rifle shot. Gabriel's head snapped up, his body tensing by instinct. His eyes scanned the horizon, landing on a thin column of smoke rising from the western tree line. Smoke. Fire. The memories crashed over him like ice water. Margaret's screams, the collapsing timbers, his desperate, futile attempts to breach the inferno that had become their home. He rose quickly, forcing the memories away. This wasn't the past, this was now, and smoke meant someone might be in trouble. Even as his mind urged caution, Gabriel's feet carried him down the cemetery hill toward his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Samson. Another shot echoed, followed by a faint, desperate cry. "Damn it," Gabriel muttered, swinging into the saddle. Everything in him wanted to turn away, to ride back to his ranch and the solitude that had become his refuge. But that cry, it pulled at something buried deep inside him, something he thought had died along with Margaret. Samson's hooves pounded the hard-packed earth as they raced toward the smoke. As they crested a ridge, Gabriel spotted the source. A wagon on the trail below, its canvas cover ablaze. Bodies lay motionless on the ground. Two men, their blood darkening the dirt beneath them. Near the wagon, a woman with auburn hair clutched two small children close, backing away from three mounted men who circled them like wolves. Gabriel drew his Winchester rifle from its scabbard, the familiar weight steadying his hands. He took aim at the ground near the riders. "That's far enough!" he shouted, his voice carrying across the distance. The men turned, startled. One raised his pistol toward Gabriel, but another, clearly the leader, gestured for him to lower it. They exchanged words Gabriel couldn't hear. Then, with a final threatening gesture toward the woman, they spurred their horses and rode off toward the east. Gabriel kept his rifle ready as he approached, scanning the trees for any sign of ambush. The woman stood rigid, a small revolver now visible in her trembling hand. Her dress was torn and smudged with dirt, but her stance was protective, fierce as she shielded the children behind her. "Stay back," she warned, raising the revolver. Her voice was steady despite the fear evident in her eyes the color of spring moss, startling in their intensity. Gabriel slowly lowered his rifle, keeping one hand visible. "I mean no harm, ma'am." Heard the shots. Came to help. The woman didn't lower her weapon. They could be waiting, watching. Her gaze darted to the trees, the ridge, back to Gabriel. "They killed our driver, Mr. Winters, and his son." Gabriel dismounted carefully, tying Samson to a nearby tree. "I'm Gabriel Thornton. I have a ranch about 5 miles from here." He gestured to the bodies. "I'm sorry for your loss. Were they family?" She shook her head slightly, the revolver wavering. "They were taking us to Helena. We only met them 3 days ago in Fort Benton." The smaller child, a little girl with hair the same rich auburn as her mother's, peeked from behind the woman's skirts. Her eyes were wide with terror, her small hand clutching a worn rag doll. Behind her stood a boy, perhaps 6 or 7, his face pale but composed beyond his years. "I'm Eleanor Sullivan," the woman finally said, lowering her weapon slightly. "These are my children, William and Sarah." Gabriel nodded, his eyes moving to the burning wagon. "We should move away, that fire's spreading." As if to emphasize his words, a crate of ammunition inside the wagon suddenly exploded, sending sparks and fragments into the air. Sarah screamed, burying her face in her mother's skirts. William flinched but remained silent, watching Gabriel with wary eyes. My horse can carry you and the children to safer ground, Gabriel offered. Then I'll come back and take care of things here. He glanced meaningfully at the bodies, not wanting to be more explicit in front of the children. Eleanor hesitated, clearly weighing her limited options. Who were those men, she asked. I can't be certain, Gabriel replied, but they might be part of a gang that's been causing trouble in these parts. They call themselves the Grey Wolves. A flash of recognition crossed Eleanor's face. There and gone so quickly Gabriel almost missed it. She squared her shoulders, decision made. We'll go with you, Mr. Thornton, chin. But I want you to know I can use this. She nodded toward the revolver, now lowered but still in her hand. Understood, Gabriel said, respecting her caution. And it's just Gabriel, ma'am. Eleanor, she replied, her voice softening slightly. And thank you. Gabriel helped them gather what few belongings they could salvage from the burning wagon. A small trunk, a carpet bag, and a leather satchel that Eleanor clutched protectively. He noted that despite her apparent exhaustion, she moved with purpose and efficiency, giving quiet instructions to William, who responded with immediate obedience. Once they were settled on Samson, Eleanor perched behind the saddle with Sarah in her lap, William riding in front of Gabriel. They set off toward his ranch. Gabriel promised to return later to bury the dead properly, a duty Eleanor acknowledged with a solemn nod. As they rode, Gabriel couldn't help but notice how Eleanor constantly scanned their surroundings, her body tense against his back. Not just the wariness of someone who had experienced violence, but the vigilance of someone who expected it to return. Whoever these people were, whatever had brought them to this remote part of Montana territory, Gabriel sensed they carried trouble with them like a shadow. Yet when Sarah began to whimper from exhaustion and fear, the transformation in Eleanor was immediate. Her voice became a soothing melody, humming a lullaby that stirred something in Gabriel's memory, a tune he'd heard long ago, in another lifetime, when he lay burning with fever in a field hospital after Antietam. It's not much further, he said over his shoulder as they crested a hill, revealing the valley below. My place is just beyond that stand of cottonwoods. The Thornton Ranch was modest but well-maintained, a sturdy log cabin with a stone chimney, a barn, corral, and several outbuildings. Smoke curled from the chimney, indicating that Isaac was home and had likely started supper. As they approached, the front door of the cabin opened, and Isaac Reynolds stepped onto the porch, shotgun in hand. At around 60, the former slave and Union veteran was still strong and capable. His dark skin was weathered from years under the Montana sun, and his beard had gone almost completely white, giving him a distinguished appearance that matched his dignified bearing. Gabriel, Isaac called, his deep voice carrying across the yard. Wasn't expecting you back so soon. His eyes narrowed at the sight of the passengers, or with company. Gabriel reined Samson to a stop before the cabin. Isaac, these folks need our help. This is Mrs. Sullivan and her children. They were attacked on the Benton Road. Isaac lowered his shotgun, his expression softening as he took in the children's frightened faces. Grey Wolves? He asked quietly. Gabriel nodded, most likely. A look of understanding passed between the men, years of friendship allowing for communication beyond words. Isaac moved forward to help Eleanor down from the horse. Welcome to Thornton Ranch, Mrs. Sullivan, he said formally. Isaac Reynolds. I help Gabriel run this place, though most days I think I'm the one in charge. A hint of humor softened his serious demeanor. Eleanor took his offered hand, her exhaustion evident as she slid from the saddle. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. I'm Eleanor Sullivan. These are my children, William and Sarah. Just Isaac, ma'am, he replied. And you all look like you could use some hot food and rest. I've got venison stew on the stove. Sarah, who had remained almost silent throughout their journey, looked up at Isaac with wide eyes. Our house burned too, she said softly, startling the adults. Just like yours did. An uncomfortable silence fell. Isaac's face tightened, his eyes moving questioningly to Eleanor, who looked as surprised as the men. Sarah, she chided gently, don't make up stories. But Isaac knelt slowly to the child's level, his expression grave. What makes you say that, little one? Sarah clutched her rag doll tighter. Your family is in heaven with my papa. The bad men burned your house too. Isaac straightened, his face unreadable. Children see things sometimes, he said quietly, then turned toward the cabin. Come inside before that stew boils over. Gabriel caught Eleanor's eye, noting her discomfort. Sarah has quite an imagination, she offered apologetically. Gabriel nodded, though something about the child's words had unsettled him. Isaac never spoke about his past before the war, and Gabriel had never asked. Some wounds were best left undisturbed. The interior of the cabin was simple but comfortable. A main room with a stone fireplace, kitchen area, and sturdy wooden furniture Gabriel had crafted himself. Two doors led to separate bedrooms. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with volumes on everything from agriculture to poetry, evidence of Gabriel's unexpected love of literature. "You'll take my room," Gabriel said, gesturing to one of the doors. "I'll bunk with Isaac in the other. It's not much, but it's clean and warm." Eleanor started to protest, but exhaustion won out. "Just for tonight," she conceded. "We'll be on our way to Helena tomorrow." Gabriel exchanged a glance with Isaac. "The stage doesn't come through for another week," he said. "And with the gray wolves about, traveling alone would be dangerous." Eleanor's shoulders stiffened. "We've already imposed enough." "It's no imposition," Gabriel said, surprising himself with the sincerity in his voice. "Come to my home, eat a hot meal, rest safely. At least until we understand what's happening." The words echoed strangely in the cabin, like a blessing or an invocation. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Sarah's small voice broke the silence. "Can my doll have supper too?" The tension dissolved, and even Isaac chuckled. "That doll looks like she could use a good meal," he said, leading the way to the table. "Now wash up, all of you. Food's getting cold." Over dinner, Gabriel observed the Sullivan family. William ate carefully, his manners impeccable, even as his hungry eyes betrayed how long it had been since they'd had a proper meal. Sarah was less restrained, her small face lighting up at the rich stew and fresh bread. Eleanor ate sparingly, her attention focused more on her children than herself. "You're a long way from anywhere, Mrs. Sullivan," Isaac remarked as he refilled her cup with coffee. "What takes you to Helena?" Eleanor set down her spoon, her expression guarded. "My cousin runs a boarding house there. After my husband passed, she offered us a place to stay." "I'm sorry for your loss," Gabriel said. "Was it recent?" "6 months ago," she replied, her eyes dropping to her plate. "Matthew had pneumonia. It took him quickly." Gabriel noticed she touched her wedding band as she spoke, turning it slightly on her finger. A nervous habit, perhaps, or something else. "And you're from?" Isaac prompted. "Denver originally." Originally, Eleanor said. "But we've been traveling since Matthew died. It hasn't been easy to find our footing." Gabriel recognized the evasion in her answers, the careful selection of details that revealed little while seeming to say much. He'd used the same technique himself when people asked about his past. "Well, you're welcome to stay here until the stage comes," he offered again. "It's safer than the road." Eleanor met his gaze, something unspoken passing between them. Recognition, perhaps, of kindred wounded spirits. "Thank you," she said simply. After dinner, Gabriel showed them to his room, a sparse space with a bed wide enough for Eleanor and Sarah, a small trundle that could be pulled out for William, and a chest of drawers. His few personal items had been cleared away by Isaac while they ate, leaving only a bookshelf and a small desk. "There's water in the pitcher for washing," Gabriel said, lingering awkwardly at the doorway. "Outhouse is out back. If you need anything in the night, don't hesitate to call out." Eleanor nodded, her composure finally beginning to crack around the edges as exhaustion took its toll. "Mr. Thornton, Gabriel, I don't know how to thank you for what you did today." "No thanks needed," he replied. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said, her voice suddenly fierce. "They wouldn't. Most people look away." The intensity of her response surprised him. Before he could reply, Sarah tugged at her mother's skirt. "Mama, can Mr. Gabriel tell us a bedtime story? Papa always did." Eleanor softened immediately, kneeling to her daughter's level. "Mr. Thornton is tired too, sweetheart, and he's done so much already." Gabriel found himself stepping forward. "I don't mind," he said, the words emerging before he'd fully considered them. "I know a few stories." The grateful look Eleanor gave him stirred something long dormant in his chest. He pushed the feeling aside, focusing instead on Sarah's delighted smile and William's cautious curiosity. Once the children were settled in bed, Gabriel sat in the desk chair and began a tale about a brave mountain lion who protected all the animals of the forest. He wasn't sure where the story came from, perhaps one his own mother had told him long ago, but the words flowed easily. Sarah's eyes grew heavy as he spoke, and even William's vigilant expression relaxed. By the time he finished, both children were asleep. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, her hand resting lightly on Sarah's hair. "You're good with them," she whispered. "Do you have children of your own?" The question struck like a physical blow. Gabriel stood, moving toward the door. "No," he said shortly. "Sleep well, Mrs. Sullivan." He closed the door behind him, leaving Eleanor staring after him in confusion. Isaac was waiting in the main room, a cup of coffee in his hand and a knowing look in his eye. You did right bringing them here, he said quietly. But there's more to their story than she's telling. Gabriel sank into a chair by the fire. I know. When she was getting settled, I noticed something, Isaac continued. His voice lowered further. A scar on her wrist, the kind you get from tending wounded soldiers. Gabriel raised an eyebrow. You think she was a nurse? Isaac nodded. War leaves marks, different on each of us. But those who've seen it recognize it in others. He paused. And that little girl, how did she know about my family? Gabriel had no answer. He stared into the flames, remembering Sarah's unsettling words. Children say strange things sometimes. Sometimes, Isaac agreed, unconvinced. And sometimes they speak truths adults can't see. He stood, stretching his aging back. I'll finish burying those poor souls tomorrow. You stay here with them. Gabriel nodded, grateful for his friend's understanding. We'll need to alert the marshal in Timberline about the attack. A lot of good that'll do, Isaac muttered. Marshal Hayes spends more time in the saloon than on patrol. They lapsed into companionable silence, each lost in thought. Eventually, Isaac retired to the bedroom they would share, leaving Gabriel alone with the dying fire in his troubled thoughts. He wasn't sure how long he'd been sitting there when a floorboard creaked behind him. Gabriel turned to find Eleanor standing in the doorway of his bedroom, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. I apologize for disturbing you, she said softly. I couldn't sleep. Gabriel gestured to the chair opposite his. Coffee's still warm, if you'd like some. Eleanor hesitated, then moved to the chair, gracefully lowering herself into it. Thank you. She accepted the cup he offered, cradling it in both hands as if absorbing its warmth. And I should apologize for my question earlier. It was thoughtless. Gabriel's jaw tightened. You couldn't have known. Known what? She asked, her eyes lifting to meet his. For a reason he couldn't explain, Gabriel found himself answering. My wife, Margaret. She was with child when she died 5 years ago. Eleanor's expression softened with genuine empathy. I'm so sorry. It was a fire, he continued, the words emerging like stones being pulled from deep water. Our home. I was in town when it happened. Eleanor was silent for a long moment. Was it an accident? She finally asked, her voice gentle but direct. Gabriel looked up sharply, surprised by the question. Most people offered platitudes or quickly changed the subject when death was mentioned. Why do you ask that? She met his gaze steadily. The way you watch the horizon, the rifle by the door, the fact that you recognize those men today. She paused. You're carrying more than grief, Miss Thornton. You're carrying vigilance. Her perception was unsettling. Gabriel looked away, back to the dying embers in the fireplace. Some questions are better left unasked, Mrs. Sullivan. Eleanor, she corrected softly. And yes, they often are. She set down her coffee cup. I should return to the children. As she stood, Gabriel noticed a flash of white at her wrist, the edge of a bandage or scar partially hidden by her sleeve. Isaac's words came back to him, the kind you get from tending wounded soldiers. Were you a nurse, he asked suddenly, during the war? Eleanor froze, her face carefully composed. Yes, she admitted after a pause. With the Union Army, I was young, but they needed everyone they could get. Gabriel nodded, pieces falling into place. I thought so. You have a certain efficiency about you, reminds me of the field nurses. Something flickered in Eleanor's eyes. Relief, perhaps, or wariness. The war taught us all something, didn't it? Some lessons harder than others. She pulled her shawl tighter. Good night, Gabriel. Good night, Eleanor. As she disappeared into the bedroom, Gabriel remained by the fire, turning their conversation over in his mind. There was something familiar about her, beyond the shared experience of the war, something he couldn't quite place, like a melody half-remembered or a face glimpsed through fog. Eventually, he made his way to Isaac's room where his friend had made up a pallet on the floor. Gabriel eased himself down, his old war injuries protesting the hard surface. Sleep would be elusive tonight, he knew, but not just because of physical discomfort. For the first time in years, Gabriel Thornton felt the stirring of something he'd thought long dead. Curiosity about another person. Concern for something beyond his daily routine of work and solitude. It was uncomfortable, like the first flow of blood back into a limb that had fallen asleep. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windowpane. A storm was coming. Gabriel closed his eyes, listening to the approaching rumble of thunder, wondering what other storms might be gathering on the horizon. The nightmares came as they always did, vivid and merciless. Gabriel stood before his burning home, Margaret's screams echoing from within. But as he ran toward the inferno, the scene shifted. He was no longer in Montana, but in a field hospital at Antietam, surrounded by the moans of dying men. Blood soaked the ground beneath his feet. A nurse bent over him, her face in shadow. "You'll be all right, Lieutenant," she whispered, her cool hand on his fevered brow. "You must live." Gabriel woke with a creepies, sweat-soaked and disoriented. The room was dark, but a faint glow from the banked fire in the main room spilled under the door. He sat up, pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes, trying to push away the remnants of the dream. Quietly, so as not to wake Isaac, Gabriel rose and made his way outside. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and cold. Stars carpeted the sky, brilliant in the absence of competing light. Gabriel drew a deep breath, feeling his racing heart begin to slow. A soft sound from the side of the cabin caught his attention. Gabriel tensed, his hand moving automatically to his hip, where his revolver would normally rest. Then he recognized the voice, Eleanor, speaking quietly to someone. He moved toward the sound, concerned that something might be wrong. He found her sitting on the bench beside the cabin, William huddled against her side, wrapped in a quilt. Eleanor was stroking his hair, murmuring words of comfort. "The dreams can't hurt you," she was saying. "They're just memories trying to sort themselves out." "But they feel so real," William replied, his voice small in the darkness. "I know they do. When I have bad dreams, I try to remind myself where I am now, safe, with you and Sarah." Gabriel was about to withdraw, not wanting to intrude on their private moment, when Eleanor continued. "When your father had nightmares after he came home from the war, do you remember what we would do?" William nodded against her shoulder. "We'd count the stars until he felt better." "That's right. One star for every blessing that we could think of." Eleanor pointed upward. "There's one, a warm bed tonight, and another, Mr. Thornton's kindness, and there, Isaac's delicious stew." Something about her tone, the gentle cadence of her words, struck Gabriel with sudden recognition. In his nightmare, the nurse's voice, it had been Eleanor's voice. But that was impossible. Thousands of nurses had served during the war. The chances that he had encountered this particular woman were infinitesimal. And yet, the certainty settled in his gut like a stone. He had heard Eleanor's voice before, long ago, when he lay wounded and delirious. "Mr. Thornton?" William's voice broke through his thoughts. The boy had spotted him standing in the shadows. Eleanor turned quickly, her body tensing until she recognized Gabriel. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her hand instinctively pulling William closer. "Yes," Gabriel said, stepping forward into the moonlight. "I'm sorry to intrude. I couldn't sleep and came out for some air." "Nightmares?" Eleanor asked perceptively. Gabriel nodded, seeing no point in denial. "An old companion of mine." Eleanor's gaze was knowing. "William, too." She squeezed her son's shoulder. "We were just counting stars. Would you like to join us?" The invitation was unexpected. Gabriel hesitated, then slowly lowered himself onto the far end of the bench. "I haven't counted stars since I was a boy," he admitted. William watched him curiously. "Mama says when you count blessings instead of troubles, the bad dreams get smaller." "Your mama sounds wise," Gabriel replied. He looked up at the vast sky, picking out a particularly bright star. "There's one, good grazing for the cattle this year." Eleanor smiled softly. "And there, a full woodshed before winter sets in." "And there," William added, pointing, "Sarah didn't lose her doll in the fire." A comfortable silence fell between them as they continued their quiet ritual. Gabriel found himself relaxing, the tension from his nightmare gradually easing. There was something healing in this simple act, in the acknowledgement of small mercies amid larger sorrows. Eventually, William's eyelids began to droop, his head growing heavy against Eleanor's side. "I think someone's ready to return to bed," she said gently. Gabriel stood. "I can carry him in for you." Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. Gabriel carefully lifted the half-asleep boy, surprised at how light he was. William stirred briefly, then settled against Gabriel's chest with a trust that squeezed something in Gabriel's heart. They walked back inside in silence, Gabriel carrying William while Eleanor led the way. In the bedroom, Sarah slept peacefully, her rag doll clutched tightly. Gabriel laid William on the trundle bed, and Eleanor tucked the quilt around him. "Thank you," she whispered as they stepped back into the main room. "It was nothing," Gabriel replied. Eleanor looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the faint glow from the banked fire. "Not to us," she paused, seeming to debate her next words. "Mr. Thornton, Gabriel, I want you to know that I'm grateful for your help, but I don't expect you to bear our burdens. We'll be on our way as soon as possible. There's no rush, Gabriel found himself saying. As I mentioned, the stage won't come through for a week, and it's safer here than on the road. He hesitated, then added, besides, Isaac would be disappointed. He seems quite taken with your children, especially Sarah. A shadow crossed Eleanor's face at the mention of her daughter. Yes, well, Sarah has always had a way of connecting with people. Gabriel thought of the child's unsettling comment to Isaac about his family. She seems unusually perceptive. Eleanor's gaze dropped. Sometimes too much so. She straightened, squaring her shoulders. I should try to get some sleep. Tomorrow I'd like to make myself useful, if you'll allow it. I'm quite capable with household tasks, and I have some medical knowledge if it's ever needed. We won't turn down help, Gabriel said. Though I should warn you, it's been a long time since this place had a woman's touch. Margaret was the one with an eye for making a home. Eleanor's expression softened at the mention of his wife. I'm sure she made this place beautiful. She did, Gabriel agreed, memories washing over him. Margaret hanging curtains she'd sewn, planting flowers by the front step, laughing as she tried to teach him to dance in this very room. He blinked, pushing the images away. Good night, Mrs. Sullivan. Eleanor, she reminded him gently. Good night, Gabriel. As she disappeared into the bedroom, Gabriel remained standing in the center of the room, feeling oddly off balance. The Sullivans had been in his home less than a day, yet already they had disrupted the careful routines he had built around his solitude. The question was whether that disruption was a threat or an unexpected gift. He made his way back to Isaac's room, settling onto his pallet with a sigh. Despite the late hour and his earlier nightmare, Gabriel felt strangely at peace. Perhaps there was something to William's star counting after all. Just before sleep claimed him, the realization that had been nagging at him suddenly crystallized. The nurse in his nightmare, the one with Eleanor's voice, she had been treating a head wound. The very wound that had left the scar Gabriel now bore on his face. If Eleanor truly had been that nurse, she would recognize that scar. And if she did, why hadn't she said anything? With that troubling thought, Gabriel finally drifted into a dreamless sleep. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, the storm having swept away the lingering autumn haze. Gabriel rose early, as was his habit, to find Isaac already in the kitchen brewing coffee. Our guest still sleeping? Gabriel asked, keeping his voice low. Isaac nodded. Far as I know. Thought I'd head out after breakfast to take care of those bodies. No sense in you making that ride twice. Gabriel clapped his friend on the shoulder gratefully. I appreciate that, Isaac. Take the wagon so you can bring back anything salvageable from theirs. As they prepared a simple breakfast of flapjacks and bacon, Gabriel debated whether to share his suspicions about Eleanor with Isaac. Before he could decide, the bedroom door opened and Eleanor emerged, already dressed and with her hair neatly pinned. She looked remarkably put together for someone who had fled from violence and spent the night in a stranger's home. Good morning, she said, her voice soft so as not to wake the children. I hope I'm not too late to help with breakfast. Just in time, Isaac replied, handing her a cup of coffee. Gabriel makes terrible flapjacks. Gabriel snorted. Better than your hardtack biscuits. Eleanor smiled at their banter, some of the tension visibly easing from her shoulders. I'm fairly skilled with flapjacks, if you'd allow me to contribute. By all means, Gabriel said, stepping back from the stove. The kitchen is yours. As Eleanor took over, Gabriel observed her movements, efficient and practiced, as she had been when gathering her belongings the day before. She seemed comfortable in a kitchen, but there was a precision to her actions that reminded him more of a surgical theater than a domestic setting. William appeared a few minutes later, his hair damp from washing, his clothes wrinkled but clean. He nodded politely to the men, then went to his mother's side. Can I help, Mama? He asked. Set the table, please, Eleanor replied. 4 plates. The utensils are in that drawer. William set about the task with the same careful efficiency his mother displayed. Gabriel noted how the boy's eyes constantly swept the room, taking in details, positions, possible exits. Not the behavior of a typical 6-year-old, but of someone who had learned to be vigilant. Sarah was the last to join them, her hair a tangled mess, clutching her rag doll. Unlike her brother's alert poise, she seemed lost in her own world, humming softly to her doll. Good morning, little miss, Isaac greeted her warmly. Did you sleep well? Sarah nodded, her large eyes solemn. My doll says thank you for the bed. Isaac chuckled. Well, you tell your doll she's most welcome. He knelt to the child's level. Would you like me to show you our chickens after breakfast? They laid some eggs just for you. Sarah's face brightened. Can William come too? Of course, Isaac replied, glancing at Eleanor for permission. Eleanor nodded. That would be lovely, thank you. She turned to Gabriel. And is there something I can help with today? Mending, perhaps, or other chores? Gabriel hesitated. He had grown accustomed to handling all aspects of ranch life with Isaac, their routine well established. The thought of incorporating someone else, especially a woman, into that routine was unsettling. And yet, there was practical sense in accepting help when it was offered. There's always work to be done, he said finally. Depends on what you're comfortable with. I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Thornton, Eleanor replied, a hint of steel entering her voice. And I won't have us be a burden while we're here. Gabriel, he corrected automatically. And I didn't mean to imply otherwise. It's just been some time since, he trailed off, unwilling to complete the thought. Since you had a woman's help around the place, Eleanor finished for him, her expression softening. I understand. Well, perhaps I can start with something simple. Your shirt has a tear in the sleeve. Gabriel glanced down, surprised to find she was right. In the events of the previous day, he hadn't noticed the rip in his left sleeve. I have a good eye for detail, Eleanor explained, seeing his reaction. Useful in my line of work. She stopped abruptly. As a nurse, Gabriel supplied, watching her face carefully. Something flickered in Eleanor's eyes. Wariness, perhaps, or calculation. Yes, she said after a beat too long. As a nurse. Isaac, who had been listening to their exchange while helping Sarah into her chair, raised an eyebrow slightly but said nothing. The moment was broken by William returning from his task, proudly announcing that the table was set. Breakfast passed pleasantly, with Sarah's innocent chatter filling most of the silence. She seemed particularly taken with Isaac, peppering him with questions about the chickens, the horses, and whether he knew how to make doll clothes. He admitted he did not, but was willing to learn. After they had eaten, Isaac prepared to leave for his grim task. Gabriel walked him to the wagon, speaking in low tones. Keep your eyes open out there, he warned. If the gray wolves are about, they might return to the scene. Isaac nodded, checking his shotgun. I'll be careful. And Gabriel, watch yourself here too. There's something strange about this situation. I know, Gabriel agreed. I'll see what I can find out while you're gone. As Isaac drove away, Gabriel returned to find Eleanor already clearing the breakfast dishes, William drying them as she washed. Sarah sat at the table, carefully combing her doll's yarn hair. Isaac will be gone most of the day, Gabriel announced. I need to check on the cattle in the north pasture, but I shouldn't be long. We'll be fine, Eleanor assured him. Perhaps when you return, I could look at that shirt? Gabriel nodded. I'd appreciate that. As he gathered his hat and rifle, he noticed William watching him intently. On impulse, Gabriel turned to the boy. Would you like to come along, William? I could use an extra pair of eyes. William's face lit up, then immediately looked to his mother for permission. Eleanor hesitated, maternal caution warring with the desire to let her son experience something normal after their ordeal. It's safe, Gabriel assured her, and we'll stay within sight of the house. All right, she conceded. But you'll listen to Mr. Thornton, William. Do exactly as he says. Yes, Mama, William agreed solemnly. As they walked toward the pasture, William peppered Gabriel with questions about ranching. How many cattle he had, how one knew if a cow was sick, what happened in winter when the grass was gone. Gabriel answered patiently, surprised at the boy's quick understanding and thoughtful follow-up questions. Your father taught you to ask good questions, Gabriel observed as they reached the fence line. William's face clouded slightly. Papa said questions are how we learn, but some people don't like them. Well, I don't mind them, Gabriel said. Ask away. William was silent for a moment, watching as Gabriel checked the fence for any weaknesses. Then, in a voice much older than his years, he asked, Are those men going to find us again? The ones who hurt Mr. Winters? Gabriel stopped, turning to face the boy directly. I don't know, he answered honestly. But if they do, Isaac and I will protect you, your mother and Sarah. William studied him, seeming to weigh the truth of his words. Papa tried to protect us too, he said quietly. A chill ran down Gabriel's spine. From the pneumonia? He asked, remembering Eleanor's explanation of her husband's death. William looked away, his small shoulders stiff. Mama says I shouldn't talk about it. Gabriel knelt to the boy's level, careful to keep his voice gentle. William, if you and your family are in some kind of trouble, it would help me to know what kind, so I can better protect you. William's eyes, so like his mother's in their intelligence, met Gabriel's. I want to tell you, he said, but I promised Mama. His lower lip trembled slightly, and I already broke one promise to Papa. Before Gabriel could respond, a distant sound caught his attention. The approach of horses. He straightened, instinctively placing himself between William and the potential threat. "William," he said quietly, "I need you to run back to the house right now. Tell your mother to get inside and stay there." William nodded, already turning to go. "Is it the bad men?" "I don't know," Gabriel replied honestly, "but it's better to be safe." As William sprinted back toward the cabin, Gabriel squinted against the sun, trying to identify the approaching riders. There were two of them, moving at a steady pace rather than the gallop one would expect from raiders. As they drew closer, Gabriel relaxed slightly, recognizing the lead rider's distinctive hat. "Marshal Hayes," he muttered, not entirely pleased. The riders came to a stop a few yards from Gabriel. The first was indeed Marshal James Hayes of Timberline, a middle-aged man with a perpetually ruddy face and a substantial belly that spoke to his fondness for the saloon. The second was a younger man Gabriel didn't recognize, dressed in the neat attire of a government official rather than a frontiersman. "Thornton," Hayes greeted him with a nod, "found something that might interest you out on the Benton Road. 2 dead men and a burned-out wagon." "I'm aware," Gabriel replied evenly. "I found the survivors yesterday and brought them here." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "That's so? Interesting that you didn't ride into town to report it." "I was planning to," Gabriel said, bristling at the implied criticism. "Isaac Reynolds has gone back today to bury the dead properly and salvage what he can." The marshal grunted, seemingly satisfied with this explanation. He gestured to his companion. "This here's Mr. Richard Bennett, special agent from Helena. He's tracking some criminals that might be connected to your dead men." Bennett tipped his hat politely. He was perhaps 30, with intelligent eyes and the composed demeanor of someone accustomed to authority. "Mr. Thornton, I understand you have witnesses to the attack?" Gabriel nodded cautiously. "A woman and her 2 children. They're staying at my ranch until the stage comes through." Bennett exchanged a glance with Hayes. "I'd like to speak with them if possible." "May I ask what this is about?" Gabriel inquired, his protective instincts rising. "Official investigation," Hayes replied unhelpfully. Bennett was more forthcoming. "We're tracking a group called the Grey Wolves. They've been involved in a series of robberies and murders across the territory, including a bank in Helena last month. The attack on that wagon may be connected." Gabriel considered this information. It aligned with what Eleanor had told him, but something about Bennett's interest made him wary. The woman, Mrs. Sullivan, mentioned they were headed to Helena to stay with her cousin. "Sullivan?" Bennett repeated, his expression sharpening. "Eleanor Sullivan, with 2 children, William and Sarah." Gabriel's caution deepened at the man's recognition of the names. "Yes. Do you know them?" Bennett's face returned to its professional neutrality. "Only by description. We've been asking about victims and witnesses along the stage routes." He adjusted his hat. "May we speak with them?" Gabriel hesitated, torn between the demands of law and order and his inexplicable desire to protect Eleanor and her children. Finally, he nodded. "Follow me to the house. But the children were traumatized by the attack. I'd appreciate if you'd tread lightly." As they rode toward the cabin, Gabriel noticed William standing on the porch, watching their approach with visible anxiety. The door opened and Eleanor stepped out, her hand resting protectively on William's shoulder. Even from a distance, Gabriel could see the tension in her posture. When they reached the yard, Gabriel dismounted first. "Eleanor," he called, "this is Marshal Hayes from Timberline and Mr. Bennett, a special agent from Helena. They have some questions about the attack." Eleanor's face remained composed, but Gabriel noticed her hand tighten on William's shoulder. "Of course," she replied, her voice steady. "Please come in, gentlemen." As Bennett passed Gabriel on the steps, their eyes met briefly. There was something in the agent's gaze, a calculation, an assessment, that reinforced Gabriel's unease. Whatever Bennett's interest in the Sullivans, Gabriel suspected it went beyond mere witness testimony. Inside, Eleanor had Sarah sit with her doll in the corner while she offered coffee to the visitors, moving with the same controlled efficiency Gabriel had observed earlier. Her hands were steady, her voice calm, but her eyes constantly tracked Bennett as he settled into a chair at the table. "Mrs. Sullivan," Bennett began, "I understand you witnessed the attack on the Benton Road yesterday. I'd like you to tell me everything you remember about the men responsible." Eleanor sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "There were 3 of them," she recounted. "They ambushed our wagon just past the creek crossing. Mr. Winters tried to outrun them, but they shot his horses." As she continued her account, Gabriel noted she provided clear, detailed descriptions of the attackers, but revealed little about herself or why they might have been targeted. Bennett listened attentively, occasionally jotting notes in a small book. "And what business brought you to Montana territory, Mrs. Sullivan?" Bennett asked when she finished. "As I told Mr. Thornton, I'm widowed," Eleanor replied. "My cousin and Helena offered us a place to stay." "My condolences," Bennett said smoothly. "Your husband died of pneumonia, I understand." A flicker of suspicion crossed Eleanor's face. "Yes, 6 months ago in Denver." Bennett nodded, writing something in his book. "And his name was?" "Matthew," Eleanor said, a new edge to her voice. "Matthew Sullivan. May I ask why that's relevant to yesterday's attack?" Bennett smiled apologetically. "Just being thorough, ma'am. In my experience, seemingly unrelated details can sometimes prove important." He closed his notebook. "I appreciate your cooperation. The Gray Wolves have been causing considerable trouble, and any information helps." Marshal Hayes, who had remained silent throughout the questioning, drained his coffee cup. "If you don't mind, Mrs. Sullivan, I'd like to speak with the boy as well. Children sometimes notice things adults miss." Eleanor stiffened. "I'd prefer William not relive the experience any more than necessary." "It's important, ma'am," Hayes insisted. "Could be the difference between catching these killers or letting them go free." Gabriel interceded. "William was quite shaken, Marshal. Perhaps another time, when he's had more chance to recover." Hayes looked annoyed, but Bennett placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Mr. Thornton is right. We've troubled Mrs. Sullivan enough for one day." He rose, straightening his jacket. "Thank you for your time, Mrs. Sullivan. I'll be in Timberline for a few more days if you recall anything else." As they prepared to leave, Bennett paused at the door, turning back to Eleanor. "One last question, if you don't mind. Your destination in Helena, what was the name of your cousin's boarding house?" Eleanor hesitated almost imperceptibly. "The Silverton House, on Crawford Street." Bennett nodded, his expression revealing nothing. "Thank you. Good day, Mrs. Sullivan, Mr. Thornton." After they had ridden away, Gabriel turned to find Eleanor watching him, her face pale but composed. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for intervening about William." "Hayes can be insensitive," Gabriel replied, "and the boy's been through enough." Eleanor's gaze lingered on him, assessing. "You don't fully trust them, do you, especially the agent?" Gabriel chose his words carefully. "Bennett seemed unusually interested in you and your family for someone investigating a random attack." "Yes," Eleanor agreed, a flicker of something, fear, resignation, crossing her face. "He did." Sarah, who had been quietly playing in the corner, suddenly spoke up. "The man with the book is looking for Papa's special book," she announced, "the one Mama hid in her sewing basket." Eleanor froze, her eyes widening in alarm. "Sarah," she said sharply, "what have I told you about making up stories?" But the damage was done. Gabriel looked between mother and daughter, seeing the truth in Eleanor's reaction. "What book?" he asked quietly. Eleanor shook her head, gathering her composure. "It's nothing. Sarah has an active imagination." "Eleanor," Gabriel said, his voice low and urgent, "if you are in some kind of danger, if that man is a threat to you and the children, I need to know. I can't protect you if I don't understand what's happening." For a long moment, Eleanor was silent, conflict evident in her eyes. Then William spoke from where he stood by the window, still watching the departing riders. "Mama," he said solemnly, "I think we should tell him the truth." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering strength. When she opened them, there was a new resolve in her gaze. "Yes," she said quietly, "I think perhaps we should." Eleanor stood by the window, watching as the dust from the departing riders settled on the trail. The morning sunlight caught in her auburn hair, creating a halo effect that belied the weariness in her stance. She turned to face Gabriel, her expression a careful mixture of resolve and apprehension. "You've been kind to us, Mr. Thornton," she began, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. "You deserve the truth." Gabriel leaned against the doorframe, giving her space. "Just the truth you're comfortable sharing," he said. "I'm not one to pry into another's business." A ghost of a smile touched Eleanor's lips. "And yet, here we are." She moved to her carpet bag, which sat in the corner of the room, and withdrew a small, leather-bound book from its depths. "Matthew wasn't just my husband. He was a clerk at the First National Bank of Denver." William had moved to stand beside his mother, his small face solemn. "Papa was good with numbers," he added quietly. Eleanor nodded, running her hand affectionately over her son's hair. "Yes, he was. So good that he noticed discrepancies in some accounts. Large sums of money being moved in unusual ways." She held up the book. "He kept records, names, dates, amounts. He believed someone was using the bank to launder money from illegal operations across the territory." Gabriel straightened, pieces beginning to fall into place. The Gray Wolves? Yes, though we didn't know that name then. Eleanor's voice tightened. Matthew took his concerns to the bank president, thinking he was doing the right thing. 3 days later, our home burned to the ground with Matthew inside. Sarah, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up from her corner. The bad men wanted Papa's book, she said, hugging her doll tighter. But he told me to hide it in Mama's sewing basket before the fire started. Gabriel's gaze snapped to the child, then back to Eleanor, whose face had paled. Sarah was with Matthew when they came, she confirmed, her voice barely audible. They didn't see her. She was playing under a quilt in the corner. Jesus, Gabriel muttered, running a hand over his face as he absorbed the implications. A 6-year-old child witnessing such violence. We fled that night, Eleanor continued. I had friends from my nursing days who helped us disappear. We've been moving ever since, trying to find someone who could help us use Matthew's evidence. Her eyes met Gabriel's directly. The cousin in Helena isn't family. He's a former Union officer who now works for the territorial government. Matthew trusted him. Gabriel nodded slowly, processing this information. And Bennett? Is he really a federal agent? I don't know, Eleanor admitted. I've never seen him before. But his interest in Matthew in the book. She shook her head. It can't be coincidence. William, who had been watching the exchange intently, spoke up. Are we going to have to run again, Mama? The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of repeated flights, temporary shelters, and constant vigilance. Gabriel saw Eleanor's shoulders slump slightly before she pulled them back, straightening her spine with the same determination he'd witnessed when she first faced him with her small revolver. Not yet, she told her son. We're safe here for the moment. She glanced at Gabriel. If Mr. Thornton still allows us to stay, knowing what we've brought to his doorstep. There was pride in her voice and dignity, a woman prepared to face whatever judgment came, but unwilling to beg. Gabriel found himself admiring her composure even as he recognized the fear beneath it. My door remains open, he said simply. I'm no stranger to trouble. Relief flickered across Eleanor's face, quickly replaced by caution. Thank you, but I want you to understand the risk. These men have resources, connections. They've followed us across 2 territories already. All the more reason for you to stay put for now, Gabriel replied. At least until we figure out who Bennett really is and whether he can be trusted. Eleanor studied him, seemingly puzzled by his willingness to involve himself in their problems. Why would you do this for strangers? Gabriel hesitated, not entirely sure of the answer himself. Part of him wanted to cite simple decency, the code of the frontier that demanded helping those in need. But there was something more, something about Eleanor herself, about the courage she showed in protecting her children, about the strange sense of familiarity he couldn't shake. Before he could formulate a response, the sound of an approaching wagon interrupted the moment. Gabriel moved to the window, tension easing from his shoulders as he recognized Isaac returning. Isaac's back, he announced, grateful for the reprieve from Eleanor's perceptive questioning. I should help him unload. As Gabriel stepped onto the porch, he saw that Isaac had indeed returned with the wagon, now loaded with salvaged items from the attack site. The older man's face was grim as he reined the horses to a stop. Marshal Hayes and some government man passed me on the road, Isaac said without preamble. Said they'd already spoken with you about the attack. Gabriel nodded, moving to help unhitch the team. Bennett said he's tracking the Grey Wolves. Isaac glanced towards the cabin, lowering his voice. You believe that? Not entirely, Gabriel admitted. Mrs. Sullivan has shared some concerning information. I'll fill you in later. They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes, unloading the few items Isaac had recovered. A trunk, some cooking utensils, a small crate of books. Then Isaac pulled something from beneath the wagon seat, a rifle wrapped in oilcloth. Found this hidden under a false panel in their wagon, he said, unwrapping it carefully. Good Springfield, Army issue, clean and well-maintained. Gabriel examined the weapon, noting the initials carved into the stock. MS Matthew Sullivan, he murmured. Husband? Isaac asked. Gabriel nodded. Seems he was more than just a bank clerk. He rewrapped the rifle. Decision made. Let's bring this inside. I think Mrs. Sullivan will want to see it. When they entered the cabin, Eleanor was at the stove preparing lunch while Sarah sat at the table, drawing with a piece of charcoal on some scrap paper. William was nowhere to be seen. Where's the boy? Gabriel asked, trying to keep his tone casual despite a flicker of concern. Gathering eggs with the chickens, Eleanor replied, turning from her task. Her eyes immediately fixed on the bundle in Gabriel's arms. What's that? Isaac found it in your wagon, Gabriel said, unwrapping the rifle and holding it out to her. I thought you might want it. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she took the weapon, her fingers tracing the carved initials. Matthew's rifle, she whispered. I thought it was lost in the fire. He must have hidden it in the wagon before. Isaac trailed off, glancing at Sarah. Eleanor nodded her understanding. He was always planning ahead. She checked the rifle with practiced ease, confirming it was unloaded before setting it aside. Thank you for bringing it back. There's more, Isaac said, gesturing toward the door. A trunk, some books, not much, I'm afraid. More than I expected, Eleanor said gratefully. The books especially will please William. He's missed his stories. As if summoned by his name, the cabin door opened and William entered, carefully carrying a small basket of eggs. His face brightened at the sight of the familiar trunk now sitting by the hearth. Our books, he exclaimed, hurrying to set down the eggs before rushing to the trunk. Mama, may I? Eleanor nodded, a genuine smile warming her features as she watched her son reverently lift the lid. It struck Gabriel then how young she truly was, not yet 30, and already carrying the weight of widowhood, parenthood, and the constant threat of violence. I managed to bury those poor souls proper, Isaac said quietly to Gabriel. Said some words over them, though I don't know if they were the right ones. They were the right ones coming from you, Gabriel assured him. Did you find any identification on them? Isaac shook his head. Nothing except this. He withdrew a small tarnished badge from his pocket. Hidden in the older man's boot, wasn't sure what to make of it. Gabriel examined the badge, a Pinkerton detective shield, worn but authentic. He showed it to Eleanor, whose eyes widened in recognition. Mr. Winters was a Pinkerton? She asked, disbelief coloring her voice. Seems so, Gabriel replied. Though why a Pinkerton detective would be driving a wagon through Montana territory? Unless he was undercover, Eleanor finished the thought. Perhaps escorting us to Helena wasn't as random as we believed. The implications hung in the air between them. If Winters had been a Pinkerton, his presence in their company took on new significance. Was he protecting them? Investigating them? And if Bennett knew this, what else might he know? The moment was broken by Sarah tugging at Eleanor's skirt. I'm hungry, Mama, she announced with a child's disregard for adult tensions. Eleanor smoothed her daughter's tangled hair. Lunch is nearly ready, sweetheart. Why don't you help William set the table? As the children busied themselves with the domestic task, the adults exchanged meaningful glances, a silent agreement to continue their discussion later, away from young ears. Lunch was a quiet affair, the children's chatter providing a welcome diversion from the gravity of the morning's revelations. Gabriel observed how naturally Eleanor integrated herself into their routine, as if she'd been sharing meals at his table for years rather than days. There was an easy competence to her movements, a quiet strength that seemed at odds with the desperation of their situation. After the meal, Isaac took the children outside to help feed the livestock, leaving Gabriel and Eleanor alone in the cabin. Eleanor cleared the dishes with the same efficiency she applied to all tasks, but Gabriel could sense her tension in the rigid set of her shoulders. This changes things, she said finally, setting the last plate aside. If Winters was a Pinkerton, if Bennett knows about Matthew's book, she trailed off, then turned to face Gabriel directly. We should leave before we bring more trouble to your door. Gabriel shook his head. Running hasn't kept you safe so far. Maybe it's time to try standing your ground. Easy for you to say, Eleanor replied, a flash of anger breaking through her composed exterior. You don't have children to protect. The words struck like a physical blow, reopening an old wound. Gabriel's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. No, I don't. But I understand something about protecting what matters. Eleanor's expression softened immediately, regret replacing anger. I'm sorry. That was cruel and unfair. It was honest, Gabriel countered, and you're right to think of your children first. He paused, considering his next words carefully. But consider this. If Bennett is connected to the Grey Wolves, he already knows you're here. Running now might be more dangerous than staying. Eleanor sank into a chair, the weight of their situation momentarily overwhelming her, carefully maintained composure. I'm so tired of being afraid, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, of making William and Sarah live like this. Gabriel sat across from her, respecting her space while offering his presence. Then let's find a way to end it. Matthew's evidence, is it enough to identify the men responsible? Eleanor nodded. Names, dates, transaction records. He was meticulous. That's why they want the book so badly. Then we need to get it to someone who can use it properly, Gabriel said. Someone we're certain isn't corrupted. That was always the plan, Eleanor agreed. But how do we know who to trust? Bennett claimed to be a federal agent. The man driving our wagon turned out to be a Pinkerton. Every time I think I've found a safe path, we'll figure it out, Gabriel assured her, surprised by his own certainty. For now, you and the children are safe here. Eleanor studied him, her green eyes searching his face. You were an officer, weren't you? During the war. Gabriel nodded, somewhat taken aback by the abrupt change in subject. Lieutenant, Union Army. How did you know? The way you assess situations. How you position yourself in a room. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. And that scar, cavalry saber if I'm not mistaken, right to left swing, meaning your opponent was likely mounted as well. Her assessment was startlingly accurate. Gabriel unconsciously raised his hand to the scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. You have a good eye, Mrs. Sullivan. Eleanor, she corrected gently, and it comes with practice. I treated too many similar wounds during the war. The moment stretched between them, waited with unspoken questions. Gabriel had the distinct sense that Eleanor was waiting for him to make a connection, to recognize something important. Before he could pursue the thought, however, Sarah's laughter drifted through the open window, followed by Isaac's deeper chuckle. Eleanor rose, the spell broken. I should check on them. Sarah can be overwhelming with her questions. Isaac doesn't mind, Gabriel assured her. It's been a long time since children's voices were heard around this place. Eleanor paused at the door, looking back at him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. Thank you, she said simply, then stepped outside into the autumn sunlight. Gabriel remained at the table, turning their conversation over in his mind. Eleanor's knowledge of his war wound was professional, certainly, but there had been something personal in the way she described it, like a memory rather than an observation. The nagging sense of familiarity returned stronger than ever. He closed his eyes, trying to capture the elusive connection, but it remained just beyond his grasp. The afternoon passed quietly, with Eleanor helping Isaac in the garden, while Gabriel repaired a section of fence that had been damaged in the recent storm. William joined him, watching intently as Gabriel demonstrated how to properly hammer a nail without splitting the wood. The boy's earnest concentration and thoughtful questions reminded Gabriel painfully of himself at that age, working alongside his own father on their Pennsylvania farm. My papa was teaching me to build things, William said suddenly, as if reading Gabriel's thoughts. Before the bad men came, Gabriel glanced at the boy, careful to keep his hands moving steadily on the task. He was a carpenter as well as a bank clerk. William nodded. He made me a wooden horse for Christmas. Said someday he'd teach me to make a real chair. The boy's face clouded, but then he had to go away. The simplicity of the statement, the child's translation of violent death into mere absence, struck Gabriel deeply. I'm sure he was a fine carpenter, he said, his voice rough with unexpected emotion. He was, William agreed solemnly. Then after a pause, do you know how to make a chair? The question caught Gabriel off guard. I've made a few, he admitted, gesturing toward the cabin. Most of the furniture inside, in fact. William's eyes widened. Could you teach me, like Papa was going to? Gabriel found himself nodding before he'd fully considered the request. If your mother approves, yes. The boy's face brightened. The shadow of grief momentarily lifted. Thank you, Mr. Gabriel. They worked in companionable silence for a while longer, William handing Gabriel nails with careful precision. As the sun began its slow descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the ranch yard, Gabriel became aware of music drifting from the cabin, a clear, sweet voice singing a lullaby he hadn't heard since childhood. Eleanor, he realized, was singing to Sarah. The melody tugged at his memory again, that persistent sense that he'd heard her voice before long ago. Mama sings that song when we're scared, William said, following Gabriel's gaze toward the cabin. She used to sing it to the soldiers too. Gabriel turned to the boy, suddenly intent. The soldiers? You mean during the war? William nodded. When she was a nurse. She told us stories sometimes about the brave men she helped. He looked up at Gabriel earnestly. Were you a brave soldier, Mr. Gabriel? I tried to be, Gabriel replied, distracted by the implications of William's casual revelation. If Eleanor had sung that particular lullaby to wounded soldiers, and if Gabriel recognized it from somewhere deep in his memory, the pieces were aligning into a pattern he could no longer ignore. The nurse in his recurring nightmare, the one with Eleanor's voice. It hadn't been a coincidence or a trick of his mind. It had been her. William, he said carefully, did your mother ever mention a place called Antietam? The boy's brow furrowed in concentration. I don't think so. But she told us about a big battle where lots of people got hurt. She said it was the worst day. Antietam, the bloodiest day in American history, they called it now. Gabriel had nearly died there, a Confederate cavalry saber opening his face from temple to jaw. He'd spent weeks in a field hospital, delirious with fever and infection. A nurse had tended him, her gentle hands and soothing voice anchoring him to life when it would have been easier to slip away. A nurse with auburn hair and eyes like spring moss. Gabriel's hands stilled on the fence post, the realization settling into certainty. Eleanor Sullivan had saved his life 12 years ago, and now, by some twist of fate or providence, their paths had crossed again. But if she remembered him, why hadn't she said anything? Mr. Gabriel? William's voice broke through his thoughts. Are you all right? Gabriel forced his attention back to the boy, managed a reassuring smile. Yes, just thinking. It's getting dark. We should finish up and head inside. As they gathered their tools, Gabriel glanced toward the cabin where Eleanor's voice had fallen silent. He would need to find a moment to speak with her privately, to confirm what he now suspected. But first there was supper to prepare, and normal routines to maintain for the children's sake. The mysteries of the past would have to wait a little longer. That evening after supper, as they sat around the fire, Isaac produced a harmonica from his pocket. Thought the little ones might enjoy some music before bed, he suggested, his weathered face softening as Sarah clapped her hands in delight. The simple melodies filled the cabin, creating an atmosphere of unexpected domesticity. Gabriel watched as Eleanor relaxed into the moment, her vigilance easing as Sarah climbed into her lap and William leaned against her side. For a brief time, they might have been any frontier family, gathered together at the end of a long day. When Isaac finished playing, Sarah begged for a story. To Gabriel's surprise, it was William who spoke up. I know one, he offered, from Papa's Book of Legends. Eleanor smiled encouragingly. Which one, sweetheart? The one about the phoenix, William said, sitting up straighter. That rises from ashes and is more beautiful than before. Isaac chuckled. That's a good one. Let's hear it, young man. William began the tale with the serious concentration of a child determined to get every detail right. Gabriel was impressed by the boy's vocabulary and poise as he described the magnificent bird consumed by flames only to be reborn. Papa said we're like the phoenix, William concluded. When bad things happen, we can still rise again, different but stronger. A heavy silence followed the boy's words. Eleanor's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she pulled her son close. That's right, she whispered. That's exactly right. The moment held a sacred quality that no one seemed willing to break. Eventually, it was Sarah who yawned widely, breaking the spell. I think it's bedtime, Eleanor said, rising with Sarah in her arms. Say goodnight, children. After a chorus of goodnights, Eleanor took the children to Gabriel's bedroom, now temporarily theirs. As the door closed behind them, Isaac stretched his aging joints. Think I'll turn in as well, he announced. Morning comes early. Gabriel nodded. I'll bank the fire. Left alone in the main room, Gabriel stared into the dying embers, thoughts churning. The phoenix rising from ashes. It seemed an apt metaphor for Eleanor and her children, rebuilding their lives after tragedy. Perhaps even for himself, though he'd been merely existing, not truly living, since Margaret's death. The bedroom door opened quietly and Eleanor emerged, closing it carefully behind her. She moved to the hearth, hands extended toward the warmth. They're asleep, she said softly. Sarah wore herself out with Isaac and the chickens. Gabriel nodded, watching the firelight play across her features. William's quite the storyteller. Matthew loved legends and mythology, Eleanor replied, a sad smile touching her lips. He read to the children every night. He sounds like a good father, Gabriel offered, a good man. He was. Eleanor's gaze remained on the fire. He believed in justice, in doing what was right, even when it was difficult. She looked up then, meeting Gabriel's eyes directly. As do you, I think. The observation hung between them, neither question nor statement, but something in between. Gabriel found himself nodding slowly. I try, he said simply, though I've failed more often than not. Eleanor studied him, her expression thoughtful. We all fail sometimes. It's whether we keep trying that matters. Another silence fell, more comfortable than the last. Gabriel watched as Eleanor tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so familiar it made his chest ache with recognition. I need to ask you something, he said finally, his voice low to avoid carrying to the other rooms. Something that's been troubling me. Eleanor turned to face him fully, her expression cautious but open. Ask. Antietam, Gabriel said, watching her reaction closely. You were there, weren't you, as a nurse? Her composure faltered for just a moment, a flicker of surprise crossing her features before she regained control. Yes, she admitted. I was with the field hospital attached to the 12th Corps. Gabriel nodded, pieces continuing to align. I was wounded there. Cavalry charge near the East Woods. Confederate saber. He traced the line of his scar. I spent weeks in that field hospital, delirious with fever. Eleanor's eyes followed the movement of his hand, her expression unreadable. Many men were wounded that day. Too many. But you remember some of them, Gabriel pressed gently. William mentioned you would sing to the soldiers. The same lullaby I heard you singing to Sarah today. A flush rose to Eleanor's cheeks. She turned away, back toward the fire. It comforted them, reminded them of home. It comforted me, Gabriel said quietly. When I was certain I would die, when the pain was unbearable, there was a nurse who sang that song, who told me I had to live. Eleanor remained silent, her back to him, but Gabriel could see the tension in her shoulders. It was you, he said, the words falling into the space between them like stones into still water. You saved my life at Antietam. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then slowly, she turned to face him, her expression a complex mixture of emotions, recognition, apprehension, and something deeper that Gabriel couldn't quite name. Lieutenant Gabriel Thornton, 6th Pennsylvania Cavalry, she said softly. I wondered if you would remember. The confirmation sent a jolt through Gabriel, though he'd been increasingly certain. Not clearly, he admitted. Fragments, your voice, the song. He paused. Your eyes. Eleanor's gaze dropped. You were so young, barely 24. The infection nearly took you. But you wouldn't let it, Gabriel continued, memory returning in pieces. You argued with the surgeon when he wanted to amputate my arm. A small smile touched her lips. He was too quick with the saw, that one. Your arm could be saved, and you needed it. You knew I would live when everyone else had given up, Gabriel said, the realization dawning. How? Eleanor looked up then, her eyes meeting his with the same intensity he remembered from his fever dreams. Some people have a stronger will than others. I recognize it in you. She hesitated, then added, the same way I recognize your scar when we met on the road. Gabriel stared at her, stunned. You knew who I was from the beginning. Why didn't you say anything? What would I have said? Eleanor countered. Hello, Mr. Thornton. I once stitched your face together while you screamed in delirium. She shook her head. Besides, I wasn't certain you were the same man until I saw the scar clearly in daylight. Many soldiers bear similar wounds. But afterward, Gabriel persisted, when you were certain. Eleanor sighed, sinking into a chair by the fire. Afterward, we were running for our lives. My husband had been murdered, my children traumatized. A chance connection from 12 years ago hardly seemed relevant. Put that way, Gabriel could understand her reasoning. And yet, the coincidence of their reunion after so many years under such circumstances struck him as significant. And now, he asked, moving to sit across from her, does it seem relevant now? Eleanor met his gaze steadily. Now, I don't know what to think, except that perhaps there are no coincidences. The words hung between them, weighted with implication. Gabriel found himself studying her face in the firelight, the fine lines around her eyes that hadn't been there during the war, the determined set of her mouth, the quiet strength in her bearing. She had been just a girl then, barely 20, thrust into the horrors of war. Now she was a woman, shaped by grief and hardship, but unbroken. When I first saw you on the road, Gabriel said slowly, there was something familiar about you. I couldn't place it, but I felt drawn to help. He paused, searching for the right words. Maybe it wasn't coincidence. Maybe it was settlement of an old debt. Eleanor shook her head firmly. You owe me nothing, Gabriel. I was doing my duty as a nurse. As I'm doing mine as a neighbor, he replied, helping those in need. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Is that all this is? Neighborly duty? The question hung in the air between them. Laced with implications, neither was ready to voice. Gabriel found himself at a loss for words, unaccustomed to the complexity of emotions Eleanor Sullivan stirred in him. Before he could formulate a response, a noise from outside caught their attention, the distant but distinct sound of approaching horses. Gabriel rose immediately, moving to the window while Eleanor tensed, her hand instinctively reaching for the rifle that leaned against the wall. Riders, Gabriel confirmed, peering through the darkness. 3, maybe 4. The gray wolves? Eleanor whispered, fear edging her voice. Gabriel shook his head. Can't tell yet. He reached for his own rifle. Wake Isaac quietly. Get the children ready to move to the root cellar if necessary. As Eleanor slipped away to rouse Isaac, Gabriel continued to watch the approaching riders. Their pace was unhurried, their formation loose, not the approach of men planning an immediate attack. Still, caution was warranted. Isaac appeared at his shotgun in hand. Trouble? He asked quietly. Not sure yet, Gabriel replied, but I don't like unexpected visitors after dark. Eleanor returned from the bedroom, her face pale but composed. The children are awake and dressed. William is keeping Sarah calm. She had armed herself with Matthew's rifle, holding it with the confidence of someone familiar with firearms. Good, Gabriel said. Stay inside until I call. If shooting starts, take the children to the root cellar immediately. He stepped onto the porch, rifle held casually but ready, as Isaac positioned himself by the window for cover. The riders had reached the edge of the yard now, their forms silhouetted against the night sky. That's far enough, Gabriel called. State your business. The lead rider reined his horse to a stop, raising his hands to show he was unarmed. Gabriel Thornton, he called back. Name's Cole Sullivan. I'm looking for my sister-in-law and her children. Gabriel tensed at the name Sullivan, immediately suspicious. Who sent you? No one sent me, the man replied, his voice carrying clearly in the still night air. But unless I'm mistaken, Eleanor's in trouble and she needs help. Behind Gabriel, the cabin door opened and Eleanor stepped onto the porch, rifle still in hand. Cole, she called, disbelief coloring her voice. Is it really you? The rider dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. As he stepped into the pool of light spilling from the cabin windows, Gabriel could see a man of about 30, with the same auburn hair as Eleanor, and a bearing that suggested military training. It's me, Ellie, he confirmed. I've been tracking you since Denver. Eleanor lowered her rifle slightly, though her stance remained wary. How did you find us? Wasn't easy, Cole admitted. I was a week behind you in Fort Benton. Then I heard about the attack on the road. His voice tightened. I feared the worst until I learned a woman and 2 children had survived. Gabriel glanced at Eleanor, trying to gauge her reaction. Her face showed a complex mixture of emotions: relief, wariness, hope. Matthew's brother, she explained to Gabriel. He was serving in California when... She trailed off, then addressed Cole again. Why now, Cole? It's been 6 months. I didn't know, Ellie, Cole replied, genuine regret in his voice. I was deployed with my unit. By the time I received word about Matthew, you were already gone. He took a step forward, then stopped when Gabriel tensed. I've been searching ever since. Eleanor studied her brother-in-law, clearly torn. Then with a decisive movement, she lowered her rifle completely. Come inside, Cole. There's much to discuss. Gabriel remained on alert as the other riders dismounted. 2 men who introduced themselves as James and Thomas, friends of Cole's from their army days. All 3 men carried themselves with the unmistakable bearing of soldiers, and Gabriel noted the cavalry insignia on their saddle blankets. Isaac, Gabriel called, would you see to their horses? As Isaac moved to help with the mounts, Gabriel followed the newcomers into the cabin, unwilling to let Eleanor face them alone despite her apparent recognition of Cole. Inside, Cole Sullivan stood awkwardly in the center of the room, hat in hand, as Eleanor regarded him with guarded hope. The family resemblance between them was clear in the lamplight. The same auburn hair, similar features, though Cole's face was weathered by sun and hardship. The children? Cole asked, looking around. Asleep, Eleanor replied, or trying to be. She set her rifle aside but remained standing, maintaining distance between them. You said you've been tracking us. Why? Cole's expression darkened. To warn you and to help, if I can. He glanced at Gabriel and Isaac, who had returned from the stable. Perhaps we should speak privately. No, Eleanor said firmly. Mr. Thornton and Isaac have earned my trust. Whatever you have to say can be said before them. Cole nodded, accepting her decision. After I learned about Matthew's death, I began making inquiries. I didn't believe the official story about a house fire. His jaw tightened. Matthew was too careful, and the timing, right after he'd raised concerns at the bank. You knew about that? Eleanor interrupted, surprised. Not until afterward, Cole admitted. But I found letters he'd sent me that I hadn't received yet. He mentioned irregularities at the bank, transactions that didn't add up. He paused, and he mentioned a name, James Blackwood. Gabriel felt Eleanor stiffen beside him. Blackwood, she repeated. Are you certain? Cole nodded grimly. Captain James Blackwood, formerly of the 7th Cavalry, Now, apparently a respectable businessman with interests in banking, mining, and railroads across the territory. Eleanor turned to Gabriel, her face pale. That was one of the names in Matthew's book, the one who controlled most of the accounts. Gabriel's mind raced, connecting pieces of a puzzle he hadn't realized he was solving. Blackwood, he repeated, the name stirring something in his memory. Not related to Margaret Blackwood, by any chance? Cole looked at him sharply. I don't know. Who's Margaret Blackwood? A cold weight settled in Gabriel's stomach. My wife, he said quietly, who died in a house fire 5 years ago. The room fell silent as the implications of this connection registered. Eleanor moved closer to Gabriel, instinctively offering his support. When I started asking questions about Matthew's death, Cole continued after a moment, I began receiving threats. Then someone took a shot at me outside my boarding house in Denver. His expression hardened. That's when I knew Matthew had uncovered something dangerous. Something worth killing for. The Gray Wolves, Isaac said from his position by the door. Cole nodded. That's what they call themselves now. A gang of former soldiers turned outlaws, led by a man who keeps his identity hidden. But based on my investigation, I believe that man is Blackwood. And Bennett? Eleanor asked, the agent who came here today? Richard Bennett? Cole's expression sharpened. He's no federal agent. He's Blackwood's right-hand man, former lieutenant in the 7th Cavalry, discharged under suspicious circumstances. Gabriel exchanged a glance with Eleanor, seeing his own concern mirrored in her eyes. Then he knows you're here, he said quietly. And he'll be back. Yes, Cole agreed grimly, which is why we need to move quickly. I have friends in Helena, genuine federal marshals who've been building a case against Blackwood and the Gray Wolves for months. With Matthew's evidence, they could finally make arrests. It's not that simple, Eleanor objected. These men have already killed Matthew and the Pinkerton agents who are helping us. How can we be sure your plan won't lead to more deaths? We can't be, Cole admitted. But staying here puts Mr. Thornton and Isaac at risk too. The Gray Wolves won't hesitate to burn this ranch to the ground, just like they did your home in Denver. The words hung in the air, heavy with threat. Gabriel found himself thinking not of his own safety, but of William and Sarah, innocent children who had already witnessed too much violence. We'll leave at first light, Eleanor decided, her voice tight. Cole is right. We've brought enough danger to your door, Gabriel. No, Gabriel said, the word emerging before he'd fully formed his thought. Running is exactly what they expect. It makes you vulnerable. He turned to Cole. How far to Helena? 3 days hard ride, Cole replied. Less if we push the horses. Gabriel nodded, mind working through options. And how many men does Blackwood have? In his direct employ, perhaps 20. But not all ride with the Gray Wolves. Those are a select few, the most dangerous. Gabriel exchanged a glance with Isaac. Years of friendship allowing for silent communication. The older man gave a slight nod, confirming his support for whatever plan Gabriel was formulating. Here's what we'll do, Gabriel said. Decision made. Eleanor and the children remain here with Isaac. The ranch is defensible, and Isaac knows every inch of this valley. Cole, you and I will ride to Helena to meet your federal contacts. Eleanor started to protest, but Gabriel raised a hand. The Gray Wolves will be watching the roads. A woman and 2 children on horseback are too easily spotted and too vulnerable. But 2 men riding hard might slip through. And Matthew's book? Cole asked. Without it, we have nothing. I'll take it, Gabriel replied. If we're intercepted, you can create a diversion while I continue to Helena. Eleanor looked between the 2 men, clearly torn. I don't like this, she said finally. Separating from the children, putting you at risk, Gabriel. It's our best option, Gabriel insisted gently. Cole can vouch for me to his contacts in Helena, and Isaac will defend the children with his life. You know that. The truth of his words seemed to reach her. Eleanor's shoulders slumped slightly in acceptance. When would you leave? Tomorrow before dawn, Gabriel replied. The sooner we get that evidence to the proper authorities, the sooner this ends. Cole nodded his agreement. My men can remain here, adding to the defense. Eleanor looked at Gabriel, searching his face as if trying to read his deeper motivations. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly. Taking such a risk for us? Gabriel held her gaze steadily. Because 12 years ago, you didn't give up on me when it would have been easier to let me go. Now it's my turn to return the favor. Something shifted in Eleanor's expression. A softening, a recognition of the connection that had brought them to this moment. Be careful, she said finally. All of us have lost enough already. This simple statement held layers of meaning that resonated in the quiet cabin. Gabriel nodded, unable to find words adequate to the moment. As the group dispersed to make preparations, Cole returning to his men outside, Isaac checking the security of the doors and windows, Gabriel found himself standing alone with Eleanor by the dying fire. "I still don't understand," she said softly, "how Matthew's murderers could be connected to your wife's death. It seems impossible." "Not impossible," Gabriel replied, staring into the embers. "Just an evil that reaches farther than we imagined." He looked up, meeting her troubled gaze. "But we'll find the truth, Eleanor. I promise you that." She nodded, believing him despite the improbability of his vow. In that moment of shared purpose and unexpected trust, something passed between them. Not quite hope, but perhaps its precursor. The recognition that neither stood alone any longer. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. The storm that had been gathering on the horizon was finally arriving, bringing with it the promise of change. Whether for better or worse remained to be seen. Dawn had not yet broken when Gabriel finished saddling Samson. The air held the sharp chill of late autumn, his breath forming clouds in the pre-dawn darkness. From the barn doorway, Eleanor watched silently, Matthew's leather-bound book of evidence clutched tightly in her hands. She had barely slept, the gravity of their plan weighing heavily on her mind. "The saddlebags are packed," Gabriel said, his voice low so as not to disturb the quiet morning. "Enough provisions for 3 days." Eleanor nodded, stepping forward to hand him the book. "This needs to be well hidden." Gabriel took it carefully, feeling the weight of responsibility it represented. "I have a false pocket in the saddle lining. Not even a thorough search would find it." He worked quickly, slipping the book into the concealed compartment he'd created years ago for carrying valuables. Eleanor observed his movements, noting the practiced ease that spoke of his time as a cavalry officer. "Cole is ready?" she asked. "Waiting by the creek crossing," Gabriel confirmed. "We thought it best to separate until we're clear of the ranch. Harder to track 2 different trails." Eleanor's expression remained composed, but Gabriel could see the tension in the set of her shoulders, the tight line of her mouth. This was a woman accustomed to facing danger, yet the strain of the past months, of constant vigilance and repeated flight, had taken its toll. "I still think I should go with you," she said, not for the first time since they'd made their plans. Gabriel shook his head. "The children need you here, and you need to be here for them." "I know," she conceded, "but sending you into danger while I remain safe." She trailed off, unable to articulate the complex mix of emotions the situation evoked. "You've been running and fighting for 6 months," Gabriel reminded her gently. "Let someone else carry the burden for a while." Eleanor looked up at him, her green eyes reflecting the faint lamplight from the barn. "Why are you really doing this, Gabriel?" "The truth." Gabriel paused, considering her question. The easy answer would be duty or simple decency, the code of the frontier that demanded helping those in need. But there was more to it, something he was only beginning to understand himself. "Because for 5 years I've been a ghost in my own life," he said finally, the admission coming from a place deeper than conscious thought. Existing but not living, moving through each day without purpose beyond survival. He adjusted Samson's saddle strap, giving his hands something to do. "Since you and the children arrived, I've felt awake again. As if I'm remembering what it means to care about something beyond the next sunrise." The honesty of his words hung in the air between them, more intimate than any physical touch. Eleanor's composure wavered, emotion flickering across her face. "I don't know what to say to that," she admitted softly. "Nothing needs saying," Gabriel replied. "Just keep the children safe. Isaac knows all the hiding places if trouble comes." Eleanor nodded, straightening her shoulders. "We'll be ready." A small noise at the barn door drew their attention. William stood there in his nightshirt, his small face solemn in the dim light. "You're leaving?" he said to Gabriel, a statement rather than a question. Gabriel knelt to the boy's level. "Just for a few days, to get help from people who can stop the bad men for good." William regarded him with eyes too old for his 6 years. "Will you come back?" The simple question carried the weight of a child who had already lost too much. Gabriel felt a tightening in his chest as he recognized the fear behind the words. "Yes," he promised, "I'll come back." William studied his face, searching for truth in the way children do, with unfiltered perception. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, for he nodded once, accepting the vow. "I'll help take care of Mama and Sarah while you're gone," he said seriously. "And Isaac, too." Gabriel smiled despite the gravity of the moment. "I know you will. You're a fine man of the house." Eleanor moved to her son's side, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You should be in bed, sweetheart." "I wanted to say goodbye," William explained, "and to give Mr. Gabriel this." He held out a small carved wooden figure, a horse, roughly shaped but recognizable. I made it yesterday, for luck. Gabriel accepted the gift, genuinely touched by the gesture. Thank you, William. I'll keep it with me. He tucked the carving carefully into his shirt pocket, close to his heart. The boy nodded, satisfied, then turned and walked back toward the house, his thin shoulders straight, despite his obvious fatigue. He doesn't say goodbye to people, Eleanor said softly, watching her son's retreating form. Not since Matthew. The implication wasn't lost on Gabriel. William had made an exception for him, a trust the boy had extended to few others since his father's death. I'll honor that trust, Gabriel said, more to himself than to Eleanor. Eleanor turned back to him, her expression resolute now, the moment of vulnerability past. Be careful. Bennett will have men watching the roads. We've planned for that, Gabriel assured her. Cole knows this territory almost as well as Isaac. A hint of dawn was lightening the eastern sky, warning that their time was short. Gabriel finished his preparations, then led Samson from the barn, Eleanor walking silently beside him. At the edge of the yard, they paused. Gabriel looked back at the ranch, his home, his sanctuary for 5 long years. Now it sheltered more than just his solitude. It housed hope and fear and possibility. Whatever happened in Helena, he knew with sudden certainty that his life would never return to the emptiness of before. 3 days, he said, turning to Eleanor. 4 at most. She nodded, her composure firmly in place once more. We'll be here. Their eyes held for the long moment, words unnecessary between them. Then Gabriel mounted Samson and with a final nod to Eleanor, rode away into the lightning dawn. She watched until horse and rider disappeared into the trees, then turned back toward the house where her children slept, unaware of the dangers and decisions that circled their lives like wolves around a campfire. The first day of riding passed without incident. Gabriel and Cole met at the creek crossing as planned, then took separate routes that would rejoin at a predetermined point 15 miles north, near an abandoned mining camp. Both men rode cautiously, alert for any sign of pursuit or ambush. Gabriel found himself grateful for Cole's military experience. The younger man was disciplined, observant, and familiar with the terrain, all qualities essential for their dangerous journey. As they made camp that evening in a sheltered ravine, Gabriel's estimation of Matthew Sullivan's brother continued to rise. You think they'll come after them at the ranch? Cole asked, keeping his voice low despite their isolated location. Gabriel poked at their small, smokeless fire. Bennett will be back, but I don't think he'll move against them directly. Not yet. He'll want to be sure of Matthew's evidence first. Cole nodded, accepting this assessment. Isaac seems capable. He is, Gabriel confirmed. Fought at Petersburg, knows how to handle himself in a fight. They fell silent, each man occupied with his thoughts as darkness settled around them. Gabriel found his mind returning to Eleanor and the children, wondering if Sarah had asked for a bedtime story, if William was keeping his promise to help, if Eleanor was maintaining her composure for their sake, while fear gnawed at her privately. You care for her, Cole observed suddenly. My sister-in-law. Gabriel looked up, surprised by the directness of the statement. I respect her courage, he said carefully. Few would have survived what she's endured. Cole studied him across the small fire, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. Matthew was my brother and I loved him, he said after a moment. But I won't pretend their marriage was perfect. He was obsessed with his work, with being right. Eleanor deserved better. Gabriel shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond to such a personal revelation. She speaks of him with great respect. I'm sure she does, Cole agreed. Eleanor is loyal to a fault, always was, even during the war. He paused. That's how they met, you know. She was nursing at the hospital where Matthew was recovering from typhoid. She never left his side even when the doctors had given up. The parallel to Gabriel's own experience with Eleanor at Antietam didn't escape him. He wondered briefly if this was a pattern with her, investing herself completely in saving broken men. Get some sleep, Gabriel said, unwilling to pursue the conversation further. I'll take first watch. Cole nodded, accepting the change of subject. He settled into his bedroll, leaving Gabriel alone with the night and his increasingly complicated thoughts. The second day brought challenges. A spring storm moved in from the west, bringing cold rain that soaked through their coats and turned the trail to mud. By midday, they were forced to seek shelter in a stand of pines. Their progress significantly slowed. We're losing time, Cole muttered, wringing water from his hat. At this rate, we won't reach Helena for another 2 days. Gabriel shared his concern, though not just for the delay. The storm would make tracking difficult, which worked in their favor, but it also meant any messages sent ahead to their contacts in Helena might not arrive in time. We push on as soon as the rain eases, he decided. Travel through the night if necessary. Cole nodded agreement, then tensed suddenly, his hand moving to his pistol. Riders, he whispered, nodding toward the ridge above them. Gabriel heard it too, the faint sound of hooves on wet earth, barely audible above the patter of rain. He moved silently to the edge of their shelter, peering through the curtain of water. 3 men on horseback crossed the ridge 100 yards distant, moving slowly, scanning the landscape below. Even through the rain, Gabriel recognized the lead rider's distinctive hat, Marshal Hayes from Timberline. Hayes, he murmured to Cole, and 2 others. Cole's expression darkened. Hayes is with them? You're certain? Gabriel nodded. Saw him clear as day. Then Bennett has the local law in his pocket too, Cole concluded grimly. No surprise, but it complicates things. They remained motionless until the riders passed from view, heading northeast, away from Helena. Only then did Gabriel relax his grip on his rifle. They're not looking for us, he observed, or at least not here. No, Cole agreed, his expression troubled. They're heading toward the ranch. The realization struck them simultaneously. Gabriel felt a cold that had nothing to do with the rain seep into his bones. Could be coincidence, he said, though he didn't believe it himself. Cole was already gathering his gear. We can't take that chance. We need to warn them. Gabriel calculated quickly. The riders had at least an hour's head start and were taking a different road. If he and Cole returned to the ranch now, they might arrive too late to help, and the evidence would never reach Helena. We split up, he decided. You continue to Helena with the evidence. I'll circle back to the ranch. Cole hesitated, clearly torn between concern for his family and the importance of their mission. Eleanor and the children are my responsibility, he argued. I should be the one to go back. You don't know the land around the ranch like I do, Gabriel countered, and your contacts in Helena won't trust the evidence coming from me alone. He was already transferring Matthew's book from his hidden compartment to his saddlebag. This is the only way, Cole. After a moment's hesitation, Cole nodded. You're right, but be careful. If Hayes is working with Bennett, they'll shoot first and ask questions never. I'm counting on the storm to cover my approach, Gabriel replied, checking his weapons. With luck, I'll reach the ranch before they do. They parted quickly, Cole continuing northwest toward Helena, while Gabriel turned Samson south, pushing the horse as fast as was safe on the treacherous terrain. As he rode, his mind filled with images of Eleanor and the children, of Isaac standing alone against multiple attackers. He had promised William he would return, but he hadn't expected it would be so soon or under such dire circumstances. The storm continued unabated, drenching Gabriel to the skin as he rode. He welcomed the discomfort, using it to maintain his focus, to push away the fear that threatened to cloud his judgment. Eleanor had survived this long through courage and intelligence. She would know what to do if danger approached. But knowing she was capable didn't ease his worry. For the first time in 5 years, Gabriel Thornton had people in his life he truly cared about, and the realization brought with it a vulnerability he had forgotten how to manage. As daylight began to fade, Gabriel pushed Samson harder, praying the sturdy horse would hold up under the strain. They were still at least 2 hours from the ranch, and darkness would only compound the danger. Eleanor stood at the cabin window, watching the storm batter the ranch. The day had passed with agonizing slowness, each hour stretching into an eternity of waiting and wondering. She had kept the children occupied with chores and lessons, determined to maintain some semblance of normalcy despite the tension that hung over the household. Isaac had been a quiet, steadying presence, tending to essential tasks while keeping a vigilant eye on their surroundings. Cole's 2 companions, James and Thomas, had positioned themselves strategically, one in the barn loft with a clear view of the approach road, the other patrolling the perimeter of the property. Storm's getting worse, Isaac observed, joining Eleanor at the window. River will be running high by morning. Eleanor nodded, her thoughts with Gabriel and Cole. Do you think they're all right out there? Isaac's weathered face softened. Gabriel knows this country better than most, and that brother-in-law of yours struck me as capable. Yes, Eleanor agreed. They both are. She turned from the window. I should start supper. The children will be hungry when they wake from their nap. Already got stew simmering, Isaac replied. You should rest a bit yourself. You've been on your feet all day. Eleanor appreciated his concern but shook her head. I'm not good at sitting still, especially now. Understanding flickered in Isaac's eyes. Then perhaps you could help me sort those seeds for the spring planting. Keep the hands busy, if not the mind. It was a kind offer, an acknowledgement of her need for activity without pressing her to discuss her fears. Eleanor followed him to the kitchen table where several cloth bags of seeds awaited sorting. They worked in companionable silence for a time, the rhythm of the task providing a welcome distraction. Gabriel said you were a nurse during the war, Isaac said eventually. Eleanor glanced up, surprised by the observation. Yes, I was very young, but they needed everyone they could get. Isaac nodded, his fingers continuing their sorting work. Must have been difficult, especially for someone so young. It was, Eleanor acknowledged, but also clarifying. When you're surrounded by so much death, you develop a different understanding of what truly matters. And what truly matters, Mrs. Sullivan? Isaac asked, his dark eyes gentle but penetrating. Eleanor considered the question, her hands stilling on the seeds. Compassion, she said finally. Courage. The willingness to stand for what's right, even when it costs you. She looked up, meeting his gaze. What about you, Isaac? What did the war teach you? A shadow crossed his face. That freedom has many meanings, and securing one kind doesn't guarantee the others. He shook his head slightly, but also that good men exist in this world, even if they are outnumbered. Eleanor sensed there was more to his story than he was sharing, but respected his privacy. They returned to their work. The silence between them now waited with shared understanding. The cabin door opened suddenly, admitting Thomas, Cole's friend who had been patrolling the perimeter. His expression was grim, his clothes soaked from the rain. Riders approaching from the north, he announced without preamble. At least 4 of them, moving slow because of the storm. Eleanor's heart sank. How far? Half hour, maybe less, Thomas replied. James is keeping watch from the barn. Isaac was already moving, retrieving his shotgun from its place by the door. Could be nothing, he said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. But best to be prepared. Eleanor nodded, her mind racing through possibilities. I'll wake the children. Get them ready. To move, to hide, to run. She left the end of the sentence unspoken, but Isaac understood. The root cellar, he suggested. It's dry and the entrance is hidden behind the woodpile. Thomas was checking his own weapons, his movements efficient and practiced. James and I can hold them off while you get everyone to safety. Eleanor placed a hand on his arm, halting him. No, no one is sacrificing themselves for us. We either all escape or we stand together. Thomas looked as if he might argue, but something in Eleanor's expression stopped him. He nodded once, accepting her authority. I'll wake the children, she said, moving toward the bedroom. Isaac, what weapons do we have? Shotgun, 2 rifles, your revolver, Isaac tallied, plus whatever Thomas and James are carrying. It wasn't much against 4 or more riders, especially if they were experienced gunmen like Bennett and his Grey Wolves. Eleanor's mind turned to Gabriel, wondering if he had encountered similar danger on the trail. The thought of him facing Bennett's men alone tightened her chest with fear. In the bedroom, Sarah and William slept peacefully, unaware of the approaching threat. Eleanor paused in the doorway, allowing herself one moment of maternal anguish before her practical nature reasserted itself. Gently, she woke the children, keeping her voice calm as she helped them dress warmly. Are the bad men coming? Sarah asked, clutching her ragdoll close. Eleanor smoothed her daughter's tangled hair. Some men are coming to the ranch. We don't know if they're bad men or not, but we're going to hide just to be safe. Like we did in Denver? William asked, his small face serious as he pulled on his boots. Yes, just like that, Eleanor confirmed. Remember how quiet we need to be? Both children nodded solemnly. They had practiced this drill too many times in the past 6 months. Wake quickly, dress warmly, stay silent, follow mama. The necessity of teaching such lessons to children so young filled Eleanor with renewed anger toward the men who had destroyed their peace. When they returned to the main room, Isaac had transformed the kindly ranch hand into the soldier he had once been. His expression was focused, his movements precise as he distributed weapons and ammunition. James signals they're still coming, Thomas reported from the window, straight up the main trail, not trying to hide their approach. That could be good or bad, Isaac noted. Either they're not expecting trouble, or they're confident enough not to care, Eleanor finished grimly. She checked her revolver, the familiar weight both comforting and terrible in her hand. Mama? William tugged at her skirt. Where's Mr. Gabriel? Is he coming back to help us? The innocent question pierced Eleanor's composure. He's still on his journey, sweetheart, But Isaac and Thomas and James are here to help us. William nodded, accepting this with the resilience of a child who had already endured too much. I can help too, he offered. I'm quiet and I can run fast to get help. Eleanor knelt to her son's level, cupping his face in her hand. The best help you can give is to take care of Sarah in the root cellar. Can you do that for me? Pride straightened the boy's small shoulders. Yes, Mama. Good man, Isaac said, gruff affection in his voice as he ruffled William's hair. Now let's get you both to that cellar before our visitors arrive. The root cellar was accessed through a trap door in the cabin floor, cleverly hidden beneath a rug and partially obscured by the woodpile. Eleanor helped the children down the narrow steps, settling them in the far corner where Isaac had hurriedly arranged blankets and a small lantern. Stay here until one of us comes for you, she instructed, fighting to keep her voice steady. No matter what you hear, don't come out unless it's me, Isaac, or Mr. Gabriel. Or Uncle Cole, William asked. Eleanor hesitated. Yes, or Uncle Cole, but most likely it will be me. She kissed each child on the forehead, lingering a moment longer than necessary. I love you both so much. Love you too, Mama, they chorused, their small faces solemn in the dim light. With a final look at her children, Eleanor climbed back up the steps, letting Isaac replace the trap door and rearrange the woodpile. They had barely finished when James burst through the cabin door. They're here, he announced, breath coming fast. Marshall Hayes from town and 3 others. One of them matches the description of Bennett. Eleanor's heart sank. Their worst fears confirmed then. What do they want? They're asking for Gabriel, James replied. Say they have official business with him. Isaac and Eleanor exchanged glances. I'll speak to them, she decided. Mrs. Sullivan. Isaac began to object. No, Eleanor cut him off firmly. We need to know what they want, and they've already seen me with Gabriel. There's no hiding my presence here. Reluctantly, Isaac nodded. But you stay on the porch. We'll back you up from inside. Eleanor squared her shoulders, checking once more that the trap door was well concealed, then stepped onto the porch, leaving the door slightly ajar behind her. The rain had eased to a steady drizzle, and through it she could see 4 mounted men in the yard, their horses steaming in the cool air. Marshall Hayes sat at the front, his ruddy face even more florid than usual. Beside him, Richard Bennett's neat appearance had suffered from the journey, but his cold eyes were as calculating as Eleanor remembered. The other 2 men were strangers to her, rough-looking individuals with the hard expressions of men accustomed to violence. Marshall Hayes, Eleanor called, keeping her voice level. This is unexpected. Hayes shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Mrs. Sullivan, we're looking for Gabriel Thornton, official business. I'm afraid Mr. Thornton isn't here, Eleanor replied. He left early this morning on ranch business. Bennett moved his horse forward, his gaze never leaving Eleanor's face. That's unfortunate. When do you expect him back? I couldn't say, Eleanor responded truthfully. Ranch business can be unpredictable. Bennett's expression hardened. Mrs. Sullivan, we know that your brother-in-law, Cole, arrived here last night. We know that he and Thornton left together this morning. What we don't know is where they went or what they're carrying. Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. They had been watching the ranch. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. Mr. Thornton has been kind enough to give my children and me shelter after the attack on our wagon. Nothing more. Bennett's smile didn't reach his eyes. Let's not play games, Mrs. Sullivan. We know about Matthew's book. We know you've been trained to get it to the authorities in Helena. He gestured toward the cabin. Why don't we continue this conversation inside, away from this unpleasant weather? Eleanor stood her ground, one hand resting on the porch railing where her revolver was concealed. I prefer to speak here, Mr. Bennett, and I have nothing more to say to you. The pretense of civility dropped from Bennett's face. Mrs. Sullivan, I have no desire to harm you or your children, but I will have that book, one way or another. Now, where has Thornton taken it? Before Eleanor could respond, a voice called from the direction of the barn. He didn't take it anywhere. All heads turned to see Gabriel emerge from the shadows, rifle in hand, Samson nowhere in sight. He moved steadily across the yard, positioning himself between the riders and the porch. He'd been positioning. Thornton, Bennett acknowledged, surprise and calculation flickering across his face. This simplifies matters. Where's Sullivan? Gone, Gabriel replied flatly. And so is the book. By now they're well beyond your reach. Bennett's eyes narrowed. I doubt that. This storm has slowed everyone's travel. He gestured to his companions. We can find him easily enough once we're done here. Gabriel's expression remained impassive, but Eleanor could see the tension in his stance. the careful way he positioned himself to keep all four men in view. "There's nothing for you here, Bennett. Best ride on." Hayes cleared his throat nervously. "Now, Thornton, we have legitimate questions about the attack on the Benton Road. As Marshal—" "You're no Marshal," Gabriel cut him off coldly. "No more than Bennett here is a federal agent. You're just another dog running with the Grey Wolves." Hayes flushed deeply, his hand dropping to his sidearm. "That's a serious accusation." "The truth often is," Gabriel replied. His eyes flicked briefly to Eleanor on the porch, communicating something she couldn't quite decipher. "Miss Sullivan, please go inside." Eleanor understood then. He was giving her the opportunity to get back to the children, to escape through the rear door if necessary. But leaving him alone against four armed men was unthinkable. "I'll stay," she said firmly, moving to stand beside him on the steps. Bennett watched this exchange with cold amusement. How touching. The war widow and the recluse rancher, united against the world. His gaze hardened. "But this doesn't have to end badly. Just tell us where Sullivan is headed, and we'll be on our way." "Why?" Gabriel asked, his voice deceptively casual. "So you can kill him too? Like you killed Matthew Sullivan? Like you killed my wife?" Bennett's expression shifted, surprise replacing calculation. "Your wife? I don't know what you're talking about, Thornton." "Margaret Thornton," Gabriel elaborated, his voice tightly controlled. "Maiden name Blackwood, sister of James Blackwood, died in a house fire 5 years ago while I was in town." Understanding dawned on Bennett's face, followed by something like genuine regret. That was unfortunate, but necessary. She discovered some of her brother's activities, was planning to expose him. He shook his head. "James didn't order that, for what it's worth. That was my call." The admission hung in the rain-soaked air. Eleanor felt rather than saw Gabriel's reaction, a slight stiffening, a focused intensity that radiated from him like heat from a banked fire. "So you're admitting it," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You murdered my wife, burned our home with her inside." Bennett shrugged, unconcerned. "Ancient history, Thornton, and irrelevant to our current situation." His hand moved to his coat, drawing a pistol with practiced ease. "Now I'll ask once more, where is Sullivan taking the book?" "Helena," Gabriel answered honestly. "To people who'll use it to bring down Blackwood and all his Grey Wolves." Bennett sighed as if disappointed by a child's poor performance. "Then I'm afraid we're done talking." He raised his pistol, aiming directly at Gabriel's chest. "Mrs. Sullivan, I suggest you step aside. This doesn't concern you." Eleanor didn't move. "It concerns me more than anyone," she replied, her own hand tightening on her concealed revolver. "You murdered my husband, orphaned my children." "Business," Bennett corrected coldly. "Nothing personal about it. Matthew made himself a problem that needed solving." He gestured with his pistol. "Now step aside or join Thornton." The tension stretched between them, rain falling steadily, soaking through clothes and skin. Eleanor was acutely aware of Isaac and the others inside the cabin, waiting for her signal, and of her children hidden below the floorboards, terrified and vulnerable. The crack of a rifle shot shattered the standoff. One of Bennett's men cried out, clutching his shoulder as he toppled from his horse. More shots followed in rapid succession, from the barn, from the trees beyond the corral. Bennett swore, wheeling his horse around to locate the new threat. "Ambush!" he shouted, returning fire toward the barn, where muzzle flashes revealed a shooter's position. Chaos erupted in the yard. Hayes and the remaining riders scattered, seeking cover while returning fire. Bennett drove his horse directly toward Gabriel and Eleanor, clearly intent on eliminating what he perceived as the primary threat. Gabriel shoved Eleanor toward the cabin door, raising his rifle in one fluid motion. Their shots rang out simultaneously, Gabriel's rifle and Bennett's pistol. Eleanor saw Bennett jerk in his saddle, blood blossoming on his coat, but his bullet had found its mark as well. Gabriel staggered, clutching his side. "Gabriel!" Eleanor cried, reaching for him as he sank to one knee on the porch steps. "Inside," he gasped, pushing her toward the door. "Get to the children." Bennett had regained control of his horse and was circling back, wounded but still dangerous. Eleanor made a split-second decision, raising her revolver and firing 2 quick shots at the advancing rider. She missed his body but struck his horse, which reared in panic, throwing Bennett to the muddy ground. Isaac appeared in the doorway, shotgun roaring as he provided covering fire. Eleanor dragged Gabriel inside, his blood warm and sticky on her hands. Behind them, the gunfight continued, shouts and curses mixing with the reports of firearms and the frightened whinnies of horses. "The cellar!" Gabriel managed, his face pale with pain and blood loss. Get the children. Eleanor hesitated, torn between the need to tend his wound and the urgent priority of protecting her children. Isaac, she called, help me with Gabriel. He's shot. Isaac turned from the window where he'd been firing, cursing under his breath when he saw Gabriel's condition. Together, they half carried, half dragged him to the kitchen table. Eleanor tore open his shirt, revealing an angry wound in his left side where Bennett's bullet had found its mark. Through and through, she assessed with professional detachment, though her hands trembled. Missed the vital organs, I think, but he's losing blood fast. A tremendous crash from the front of the cabin interrupted her examination. Someone had driven a horse into the door, splintering the wood. Isaac whirled, shotgun raised as Hayes burst through the broken entrance, pistol in hand. Drop it, old man, the corrupt marshal growled, or I'll finish what Bennett started. Isaac stood his ground, shotgun steady. You'll be dead before you pull that trigger, he promised, the quiet certainty in his voice more terrifying than any shout. Hayes's gaze darted from Isaac to Gabriel bleeding on the table, to Eleanor standing protectively beside him. Whatever he saw in their faces gave him pause. The moment of hesitation cost him dearly. A small figure erupted from the trap door behind him. William, silent and determined, swinging a heavy iron skillet with all his 6-year-old strength, the makeshift weapon connected with Hayes' knee with a sickening crack. The marshal howled in pain, his pistol discharging harmlessly into the ceiling as he stumbled. Isaac didn't waste the opportunity. The butt of his shotgun caught Hayes square in the face, dropping him unconscious to the floor. William, Eleanor gasped, horrified and proud in equal measure. I told you to stay hidden. The bad man was going to hurt you, William replied, his small face fierce despite his obvious fear. Like they hurt Papa. Before Eleanor could respond, another voice called from outside. Mrs. Sullivan, Isaac, it's Cole. Eleanor's head snapped up in disbelief. Cole? Isaac moved cautiously to the shattered door, peering out. It's him, he confirmed, with others, men in uniform. Relief washed over Eleanor in a dizzying wave. She turned back to Gabriel, who lay pale and still on the table, his blood soaking into the wood. Hold on, she whispered, pressing a clean cloth to his wound. Help is here. Cole burst through the doorway, his clothes torn and muddy, a bloodied gash across his forehead. Behind him came 3 men wearing the distinctive badges of U.S. Marshals. Eleanor, Cole exclaimed, taking in the scene with a soldier's rapid assessment. Are you hurt? The children? We're alive, Eleanor managed, not looking up from her work staunching Gabriel's wound. Sarah's still in the cellar. William. She glanced at her son, who stood frozen beside Hayes's unconscious form, still clutching the skillet. William helped. Cole crossed to the boy, gently taking the improvised weapon from his rigid fingers. You did good, buddy, he said softly, kneeling to the child's level. Real good. Your papa would be proud. William's composure cracked then, tears filling his eyes as Cole pulled him into a protective embrace. One of the marshals moved to retrieve Sarah from the cellar, while another secured Hayes with handcuffs. Bennett? Eleanor asked, her hands continuing their methodical work on Gabriel's wound. Dead, Cole replied grimly. 2 of his men as well. The 3rd surrendered. Eleanor nodded, absorbing this information with the detachment of someone who had seen too much death to be shocked by more. What happened? You were supposed to be on your way to Helena. Cole moved to her side, helping her lift Gabriel's shoulder to examine the exit wound. We were, but we encountered these marshals on the road. They'd received my message and were already heading this way. When we heard about Hayes and Bennett riding toward the ranch, he shook his head. Gabriel insisted on turning back, said he had a bad feeling. Eleanor's hands stilled momentarily. He came back for us, she murmured, looking down at Gabriel's pale face. He rode like the devil himself was chasing him, Cole confirmed. Nearly killed that horse of his, getting here ahead of us. We barely had time to set up positions before Bennett and his men arrived. One of the marshals approached the table, hat in hand. Ma'am, we need to get this man to a doctor. Town's too far in this weather, but we passed a mission about 5 miles north. They'll have medical supplies. Eleanor nodded, her mind shifting to practical concerns. I'll need clean bandages, hot water, whiskey if you have it. Her voice took on the crisp authority of the battlefield nurse she had once been. And a wagon with a flat bed. He can't ride with that wound. The marshal nodded, impressed by her composure. Yes, ma'am, right away. As the cabin filled with activity, marshals carrying Hayes outside, Isaac retrieving Sarah from the cellar, Cole organizing the preparation of a wagon, Eleanor remained at Gabriel's side, her hands steady as she cleaned and bandaged his wound as best she could. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice too low for others to hear. "I didn't save you at Antietam just to lose you now." Whether it was her words or the pain of her ministrations, Gabriel's eyes fluttered open, focusing with difficulty on her face. "Eleanor," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "Don't talk," she instructed, her professional tone belied by the tenderness in her eyes. "Save your strength." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "The children?" "Safe," she assured him. "Everyone's safe. Bennett is dead. It's over." Relief washed over his features, followed by a grimace of pain. "Not quite how I planned it," he managed. Despite everything, the blood, the danger, the uncertainty still ahead, Eleanor found herself smiling. "No, I imagine not." Gabriel's hand found hers, his grip weak but determined. "I kept my promise," he whispered. "I came back." Eleanor's composure finally cracked, tears filling her eyes as she squeezed his hand. "Yes," she agreed softly. "You did." The mission infirmary was small but clean, staffed by an elderly doctor and 2 nuns who received the wounded man and his unusual entourage with calm efficiency. Eleanor refused to leave Gabriel's side as the doctor examined and properly treated his wound, her nursing experience proving invaluable during the procedure. "He's lucky," the doctor informed her when they had finished. "An inch to the right, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. But barring infection, he should recover fully." Eleanor nodded, exhaustion finally catching up with her, now that the immediate danger had passed. "Thank you, doctor." "You should rest," he advised, noting her pallor. "Your children, too. Sister Agnes has prepared a room for you all." Eleanor glanced at William and Sarah, who had fallen asleep on a bench in the corner of the infirmary, leaning against each other like saplings after a storm. "Yes," she agreed, "but I'd like to stay with Mr. Thornton a while longer, if I may." The doctor's eyes softened with understanding. "Of course. I'll have the children moved to your room. They'll sleep through till morning, I expect." Left alone with Gabriel, Eleanor sank into the chair beside his bed, her body aching with the accumulated tension of the day. Outside, rain continued to fall, drumming softly against the infirmary windows. In the distance, she could hear the low murmur of voices as Cole conferred with the marshals, planning their next steps now that Bennett was dead and evidence of Blackwood's crime secured. Gabriel slept peacefully, his breathing steady, color gradually returning to his face. Eleanor found herself studying him in the quiet, the strong line of his jaw, the scar that traced from temple to cheek, the silver threading through his dark hair. A face that had become dear to her in an astonishingly short time. "You should sleep," Gabriel murmured, his eyes still closed. Eleanor started, then smiled tiredly. "I thought you were asleep." "Hard to sleep with you staring at me," he replied, opening his eyes to look at her. Despite the pain he must be feeling, his gaze was clear and direct. "I wasn't staring," Eleanor protested weakly. "I was monitoring your condition." A hint of amusement touched his lips. "Professional interest only, then?" Eleanor felt a blush rise to her cheeks, surprising herself with such a girlish reaction. "Perhaps not entirely professional," she admitted. Gabriel's expression sobered. "Bennett's dead?" "Yes," Eleanor confirmed. "And Hayes is in custody. Cole says with Matthew's evidence and the marshal's testimonies, Blackwood's operation will be dismantled within weeks." Relief washed over Gabriel's features. "Good," he said simply. Then after a pause, "And Margaret? Will she have justice too?" Eleanor reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Bennett confessed to ordering the fire. The marshals heard it. It won't bring her back, but it closes a door," Gabriel finished for her. "Allows for a new one to open." His eyes held hers, a question in their depths. Eleanor understood what he was asking, what possibilities might exist once the immediate dangers were past, once grief had been honored and justice served. But it was too soon for such conversations, too raw and fragile a moment for decisions that would shape all their futures. "Rest now," she said softly. "We can talk about doors another time." Gabriel accepted this with a slight nod, his eyes drifting closed once more. But he didn't release her hand, and Eleanor didn't pull away. They remained connected in the quiet infirmary, the rain a gentle counterpoint to their synchronized breathing. Outside, the storm was passing. Stars began to emerge in patches of clearing sky, their ancient light reaching down to touch a world where justice had prevailed, if only in this small corner on this particular day. Epilogue. The wildflowers had returned to the hillside cemetery, their bright colors a stark contrast to the weathered wooden crosses. Gabriel stood before Margaret's grave, hat in hand, the morning sun warm on his shoulders. 6 months had passed since Bennett's death. 6 months of healing, both physical and emotional. He placed fresh flowers on the grave, then straightened, studying the new headstone that had replaced the simple wooden marker. It told more of the truth now. Margaret Ann Thornton, beloved wife, justice received. I think she would approve, Eleanor said softly from behind him. Gabriel turned, offering a smile to the woman who had become so central to his life. Eleanor wore a simple blue dress, her auburn hair caught up in a practical knot at the nape of her neck. In her arms, she carried a small bouquet of wildflowers. May I? She asked, gesturing toward the grave. Gabriel nodded, stepping aside as Eleanor placed her flowers beside his own. I never knew her, Eleanor said, but I wish I had. She must have been remarkable to have earned such devotion. She was, Gabriel agreed, and she would have liked you, your strength, your commitment to what's right. Eleanor's eyes met his, a depth of understanding in their green depths that never ceased to move him. I've been thinking about what you said, she began, about doors closing and opening. Gabriel felt his heart quicken. In the months since Bennett's death, much had changed. Blackwood had been arrested, his criminal empire dismantled. Cole had accepted a position with the U.S. Marshals in Helena, and Eleanor and the children had remained at the ranch, establishing a new routine that had brought life and purpose back to the once solitary homestead. They had spoken of many things during those months, but had carefully avoided discussing the future. What would happen once Eleanor's period of mourning for Matthew was complete? Once the children were more settled? Once Gabriel's wound had fully healed? And what conclusions have you reached? He asked, trying to keep his tone light despite the weight of the moment. Eleanor looked down, gathering her thoughts. Matthew will always be part of who I am, she said slowly. The father of my children. My first love. She raised her eyes to his. But I've learned that the heart doesn't have limited capacity. It expands to encompass new love without diminishing what came before. Gabriel took a step closer to her, hope rising in his chest. New love? Eleanor's smile held a hint of the young nurse who had once commanded a war hospital with quiet authority. Yes, Gabriel, new love. She reached for his hand, her fingers warm and sure against his. If you're willing to take on a ready-made family with all our complications. Gabriel's free hand moved to cup her cheek, his touch reverent. Eleanor Sullivan, I've been willing since the moment you stood on that road with a revolver in your hand, protecting your children with the fierceness of a mother bear. Her laugh was soft and genuine, not the most romantic beginning to a courtship. Perhaps not, Gabriel conceded with a smile, but entirely fitting for us, don't you think? Instead of answering, Eleanor rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, a gentle, questioning kiss that quickly deepened as Gabriel pulled her closer. When they finally parted, both somewhat breathless, the world seemed to have shifted subtly on its axis, realigning itself around this new reality. The children? Gabriel asked, suddenly concerned about their reaction. Eleanor's eyes danced with suppressed mirth. William has been dropping increasingly unsubtle hints for weeks. Just yesterday, he asked if he could call you Pa once you and I stopped being silly and got married. Gabriel laughed, a deep, genuine sound that echoed across the hillside. And Sarah? Sarah says she already told her doll we were getting married, so we have to, or the doll will be very disappointed. Joy welled up in Gabriel, unexpected and overwhelming. Not the fierce passion of youth, but something deeper and more enduring. A recognition of having found, against all odds, a second chance at happiness. Well, he said solemnly, we certainly can't disappoint the doll. Eleanor's laughter joined his, the sound carrying across the cemetery and down into the valley where their home waited. Behind them, the wildflowers nodded in the gentle breeze, nature's quiet witnesses to love's renewal. As they walked hand in hand back toward the ranch, Gabriel reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the battlefields of Antietam to the fire that had nearly claimed his life. From the loss of Margaret to the day he'd found Eleanor and her children stranded on the road. Each step, even the painful ones, had been necessary to reach this place of healing and hope. Like gold refined by fire, they had emerged from their trials stronger, purer, more precious for having endured. And in each other, they had found not just companions for the journey ahead, but fellow survivors who understood the true value of what they had gained. It was enough, more than enough, it was everything.